Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Now, देखिए regarding IR, I've gone through what has been done till now through your lectures also. So I think Shubhram started the discussion with a discussion on the neighborhood and taking into reference the whole idea of India's neighborhood and primarily the context of India-Pakistan relationship. Right? So that is there, and then you've done a brief on Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. Now, regarding Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, I'll be taking specific sessions with you on Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar also, where you anyways know the broad context and the background. What I'll be doing with you is taking up only the recent context in the light of the China factor. Because almost in the whole of neighborhood, if a question is going to come to us in the examination, it is going to be from the light of India's relations with its immediate neighborhood in the context of China's presence in South Asia. So whether it is in Sri Lanka, whether it is in Myanmar, whether it is Bhutan, whether it is Nepal, or obviously the Pakistan question, you will see that the China angle will keep coming in again and again, or Sri Lanka, wherever. So in Sri Lanka and in Myanmar and in Bangladesh, you've done these three countries, but with them specifically on the China factor, I'll be taking some 40 minutes or so on each of these also, which will be more pertinent to in the light of what is happening in the context of India-China relationship and its implications on India's relations with its neighborhood. Okay. Now, why Madam also kept on emphasizing on neighborhood and we are also emphasizing again and again on neighborhood is key. When you see the past pattern of questions, you will find that in terms of the pattern of the question paper, there is a strong focus on India's neighborhood, but primarily in the light of the China aspect. देखिए एक चीज अगर आप I'll tell you, I hope anyways you've gone through the breakup of the IR section in terms of क्या questions आते हैं. देखिए as I keep saying, almost harping in every class, if you are well versed with from what areas questions are asked or what are the important areas, then you will be able to appreciate the needs of the exam and focus on reading the subject from an exam centric point of view. Otherwise, there is no limit to what you can read on any subject, including on IR. IR में लोग एक ही area पे भी PhD करते हैं, right? But they do a PhD. We have a limited approach to the subject, but a limited approach which gives us a wider worldview of India's relationship. तो अगर आपने देखा होगा in terms of your IR syllabus, देखिए what I'm going to do first is today I'm going to take the first 10 minutes only to talk about the syllabus. Just 10 minutes, but these 10 minutes will give you a very clear understanding of what you need to focus on in IR from your exam point of view. देखिए in terms of your syllabus, firstly, if you divide your syllabus, IR syllabus, there are 3 or 4 broad categories that you should keep your mind on. One category is India's relations with South Asian countries. The other category is India's relations with the major powers. And the third category is India's international organizations and India's position on international organizations or relationship with them. If I was to add the fourth category of a distinctive heading which is mentioned in your syllabus, ये सब broadly headings are mentioned in your syllabus. One is South Asia, one is major powers, one is international organizations. The fourth, if I was to say, is a category of India's relations with its diaspora. Okay, so the diaspora part is also important. आपने देखा होगा कुछ questions आए हुए हैं. Especially, there was a question a couple of years ago about India's relations with its diaspora in Southeast Asia. There was once a question on India's relations with its diaspora, particularly with respect to Europe and North America. Okay, so diaspora is also one aspect जो आपके syllabus में line mentioned है. देखिए GS पेपर 2 का syllabus देखिए जाके नीचे 4 लाइनें लिखी हैं syllabus की. ये ब्रॉडली इन्हीं कैटेगरीज पे है, बट दिस इज फ्रॉम वेयर द मेन सेंट्रिक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. प्रीलिम्स में जो आता है आईआर का रिलेशन, विच इज लार्जली what I say is a map based understanding of IR, and also partly where you also cover a brief idea about some of the international organizations. क्योंकि यहाँ पे जब हम मेंस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से वी कवर इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, it is primarily, for example, United Nations, WTO, United Nations, WTO, if I was to say climate change negotiations, ठीक है, sorry, climate change negotiations, and if I was to add IMF and World Bank also, but yeah, IMF and World Bank आप वैसे भी वहां पढ़ते हैं ज्यादा इकोनॉमी में. So the IMF World Bank debate is largely covered in the economy section, not so much here. Even WTO is covered under the economy section, but WTO often becomes a part of discussion, especially if there are major trade negotiations going on. ठीक है, तो एक तो ये. Next, within South Asia, whether like ma'ams discussed with you Pakistan in considerable detail, the question, it's important to understand that mostly questions when come on India's relations with its immediate neighborhood, whichever are the South Asian countries, it is often a more specific question. देखिए क्वेश्चन कैसा आ रहा है आप लोगों को, you have to write in 250 words, right? So questions are not very broad questions. Discuss the nature and evolution of India-Pakistan relationship. ऐसा क्वेश्चन नहीं आता. क्वेश्चन आएगा discuss the critical issues and challenges with respect to the implementation of the Indus Water Treaty. तो क्वेश्चन स्पेसिफिक आता है इन साउथ एशिया, तो आपको एक स्पेसिफिक अप्रोच रखनी है, प्राइमरीली फोकसिंग ऑन इश्यूज. द हिस्टोरिकल अप्रोच इज ऑलवेज द अप्रोच टू स्टडी इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन. देखिए एक बड़ा सिंपल चीज हम कहते हैं कि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस पढ़ते हुए एक ब्रॉड हिस्टोरिकल अप्रोच होना चाहिए. यू शुडंट बिलीव दैट because you're reading something for the first time, it is happening for the first time. A historical approach helps you in a better understanding of the topic. However, questions will always come from recent debates and discussions of India's relations with its neighborhood. तो approach पढ़ते वक्त एक broad historical idea जरूरी है, but question issue specific आएगा in South Asia and more so on some of the recent issues which have been in discussion. Okay. So whether it is Pakistan or whether it is Sri Lanka or Myanmar or Bhutan or Nepal, whatever these countries are, or definitely Afghanistan, Bangladesh, right? So in South Asia, whenever you are covering these countries, हमेशा issue specific orientation होता है. Why am I emphasizing this point of being issue specific? Is because there is one part of the syllabus जो अभी मैंने यहाँ नहीं लिखा है, which is India's relations with its what we say a part of its extended neighborhood, which is West Asia, Southeast Asia और Central Asia. ये तो South Asia है, right? लेकिन व्हाट वी कॉल एज अ पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया द एक्सटेंडेड नेबरहुड, ये तो इमीडिएट नेबरहुड कहते हैं मैंने, लेकिन एक्सटेंडेड नेबरहुड इज वेदर द एक्सटेंडेड नेबरहुड in terms of extended neighborhood, what is to be understood is that in extended neighborhood, what we mean is West Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. West Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. Ab, why I'm categorizing these three as different is for two reasons. Firstly, questions from West Asia, Southeast Asia, or Central Asia, when they will come, they will be not issue specific. They are largely likely to be broad questions. They can be issue specific as well, but they are likely to be a broad or generally framed questions. देखिए, कुछ भी पढ़ने से पहले कीप हार्पिंग, क्वेश्चन पेपर पता होना चाहिए. तो आई विल गिव यू दिस एग्जांपल ऑफ व्हाट आर द ब्रॉड क्वेश्चंस लुक लाइक. जैसे मैंने बोला, अगर पाकिस्तान पे क्वेश्चन आएगा तो स्पेसिफिकली से इट विल बी ऑन द इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी, और इट विल बी ऑन से एनी अदर पर्टिकुलर इशू, से अबाउट द न्यूक्लियर क्वेश्चन and in the India-Pakistan relationship, okay, or Afghanistan and India, the changing scenarios in Afghanistan and its implication for India-Pakistan relationship, or the increasing Chinese presence in Pakistan and its implication for India-Pakistan relationship. So questions are more specific. But when you come to West Asia, Southeast Asia, or Central Asia, for all these areas, firstly, India has a specific policy. For Southeast Asia, what we have is the Look East policy. For West Asia, what we have is the Look West policy. For Central Asia, we have the Connect Central Asia policy. ये सारी policies हैं जो officially have been formulated by the government of India. Okay. For example, when you'll see Southeast Asia, in the early 1992 itself, India formulated the Look East policy for dealing with India's eastern neighbors. Then for West Asia, India formulated a formal policy to deal with India's West Asian neighbors, particularly where the names of Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are the prominent ones. So India's Look West policy was given in 2005, and India's policy to connect or to deepen India's relations with Central Asian countries, called as the Connect Central Asia policy, was given in 2012. तो डिफरेंट पॉलिसीज हैव बीन गिवन. अब यहां से क्वेश्चंस कैसे आते हैं? कई बार तो एकदम स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड क्वेश्चन आता है, दैट दे विल आस्क यू डिस्कस द की इश्यूज एंड चैलेंजेस विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द इंप्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ इंडियाज लुक ईस्ट पॉलिसी और लुक वेस्ट पॉलिसी और कनेक्ट सेंट्रल एशिया पॉलिसी. ओके, तो ये एक ब्रॉड क्वेश्चन है वेयर यू शुड नो व्हाट इज द पॉलिसी, व्हाई दिस पॉलिसी वाज फॉर्मुलेटेड, हाउ सक्सेसफुल इट हैज बीन, or what can be done to improve its implementation. तो ये broad understanding होती है. For example, when we study these areas, you are not going to go into country by country studying India's relations with each of these countries. But South Asia में you study India's relation individually on a bilateral level with each of the countries. For example, in Southeast Asia, nobody is going to discuss with you India's relations with Malaysia separately, Indonesia separately, Thailand separately, फिलीपीन सेपरेटली और वियतनाम सेपरेटली नहीं करते हैं. क्यों? बिकॉज दे हैव सीन एज अ पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया लार्जर. हमारे जीएस अप्रोच से वी सी दिस एज अ पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया ईस्टर्न नेबरहुड एंड एज अ पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया ओवरऑल एंगेजमेंट विद द ईस्टर्न नेबरहुड. तो आपको पहले ये पता होना चाहिए कि क्या किस एरिया पे कितना फोकस करना है. इन साउथ एशिया यू हैव टू गो कंट्री वाइज. इन साउथ ईस्ट एशिया एंड वेस्ट एशिया there is not a very strong need to go country by country. But having said that, when we go to West Asia specifically, so if I was to look into West Asia, यहां पे हम अक्सर 3 कंट्रीज की बात करते हैं, फोकसिंग मोर ऑन योर सऊदी अरेबिया, Iran and Israel. सेपरेट क्वेश्चन इजराइल पे आया हुआ है पहले. इन द पास्ट 5 years you'll have seen a question on India Israel relationship आया हुआ है. सऊदी अरेबिया पे भी एक बार पहले क्वेश्चन आया हुआ है, ईरान पे भी आया हुआ है. दीज आर 3 बिग कंट्रीज. तो एक क्वेश्चन इन पे सेपरेटली भी आए हुए हैं, but they will often tied. For example, the Iran question was partly tied to Afghanistan. Okay, why? Discuss the strategic importance of Iran for India. Okay, and the key challenges in the India-Iran relationship. तो ईरान एक बहुत बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट कंट्री है बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स प्रॉक्सिमिटी टू बोथ अफगानिस्तान एंड ऑल्सो बिकॉज ऑफ ह्यूज ऑयल रिजर्व्स एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, मेनी थिंग्स जो हम बात करेंगे. तो आप जब कंट्री स्पेसिफिक पे अगर फोकस रखना ही है एक ब्रॉड, तो इस पे रखना है क्या, सऊदी अरेबिया, इजराइल एंड ईरान एंड देयर रिलेशन. फॉर एग्जांपल द अब्राहम अकॉर्ड्स हैपेंड. हो सकता है आपने सुना हो, नहीं सुना कोई बात नहीं, बाद में बात करेंगे. बट ये ही 3 कंट्रीज पे फोकस रखना है. ओके, व्हेन इट कम्स टू सऊदी अरेबिया, ईरान एंड इजराइल. नाउ सिमिलरली एक क्वेश्चन आया था in your mains examination on issues and challenges in achieving energy security for India, discuss in the light of India's foreign policy. Energy security, as we'll discuss later, it's an important objective of any country's foreign policy, more so for a country like India, which has huge dependence on imports for its oil and energy needs. Now, what role can foreign policy play in achieving energy security? ये question directly and indirectly primarily was related to West Asia, as we are aware that West Asia provides an important source of oil and gas to India, which is vital to India's energy security. It is true that if you go look at Africa, if you look at Latin America, they are also meeting India's energy security needs, but the primary supplier remains whom? West Asia, right? So ये एक और aspect है. तो इसमें दिस इज देयर. नाउ एज फार एज साउथ ईस्ट एशिया इज कंसर्न, और यहां पे द साउथ ईस्ट एशिया इज कंसर्न, दिस पार्टली ओवरलैप्स विद ईस्ट एशिया आल्सो, वेयर यू हैव सम इंपॉर्टेंट प्लेयर्स, स्टैंड अलोन प्लेयर्स लाइक जापान. ओके, अपार्ट फ्रॉम others, Japan is one strong standalone player which is extremely important for India. देखिए, हम उसी कंट्री के रिलेशन को उतनी डेप्थ तक पढ़ते हैं depending on how important it is for India. The more important a country's relationship is for India, the more important it becomes in your exam. There is a reason that almost for the last 10 years, no year goes that there is no question on India-China relationship, directly or indirectly, because China is the most important Indian neighbor that India has to deal with, for good or for bad reasons, whatever they are. So we should, आपको एक broad समझ पहले ही होनी चाहिए पढ़ने से पहले कि सर क्या एरिया ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्या कम, because depending on its importance and weightage, you decide how much to read in that area, because you should know what amount of depth you should go into in a particular subject. Only then you should actually delve deeper into it. Definitely coming to where the major parts. Now, in terms of major powers, no doubt USA, China, and Russia. ये major powers हैं, and they are the ones which remain mostly important. Now, there are other players also, like the European Union, like other countries are also, and European Union as an organization is also there, and there are other powers also. But the US, China, and Russia are the major ones, and they remain extremely important from your exam point of view. इस पे भी question, because they are so important, question will always be issue specific. For example, India-China trade relationship, its issues and challenges. India-China transboundary water sharing issues, specifically in the light of Brahmaputra. Okay, so India-China water sharing issues, India-China, for example, trade issues, the border issues there. But apart from that, China's increasing presence in South Asia and its implications for India. Okay, so all these things become important. China को तो एक India specific issue becomes important. For example, Quad, AUKUS, RCEP, everything which is related to China is extremely important for India. तो आपको ये पता होना चाहिए हमें पढ़ते हुए फोकस किन चीजों पे रखना है. इंडिया चाइना रिलेशनशिप में भी यू शुड नो, मैं आपको पहले बता दूं, इसके अलावा कोई और इशू है ही नहीं रिलेशनशिप में. तो आपको पढ़ते हुए whenever you read, you should know these are the issues to focus on. When it comes to the India-China relationship, whether it is Chinese presence in South Asia is one issue, The border issue is partly one issue. The water sharing or the river, water or river sharing issue related to the Brahmaputra is one important issue. Trade is important issue. Now, Chinese increasing presence in South Asia is related to their what they call as the One Belt, One Road initiative. That's one which is related to that. Apart from this, China's and the next question which comes is about India's triangular. देखिए एक क्वेश्चन आगे जो आगे आएंगे मैं आपको बता रहा हूं. एक तो क्वेश्चन आएगा पक्के में इन द फ्यूचर ऑफ इंडिया. Questions will be asked related to India-US relationship and its or India-US relationship and India-Russia relationship as to how they impact each other. If you're witnessing this right now, right? So the India-Russia relationship remains important, but so obviously the India-US relationship has gained prominence. वैसे ही India-US and इंडिया चाइना, तो इसके रिलेशन पे क्वेश्चन पहले ही आ चुका है. लास्ट ईयर व्हेन ऑकस वाज अनाउंस्ड द क्वेश्चन केम ऑन ऑकस. इट्स वेरी प्रिडिक्टेबल कि समथिंग व्हेन बिग ऑफ सिग्निफिकेंस हैपेंस. When the question came on AUKUS was announced, before that Quad was announced, the question came on the relation between Quad and AUKUS. When you hear the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar recently saying that Quad is no NATO, Quad is not going to be Asian NATO, or that it is a lazy explanation to say that Quad is going to work like NATO. Quad is not a military alliance, AUKUS is, है ना. तो ऑस्ट्रेलिया, देखिए जिसको नहीं समझ में आ रहा है कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, बट ट्राई टू, आप लोगों को एक पहले मैं बता दूं, अगर आपको लगता है कि knowledge is going to be acquired in one day, it doesn't happen, but broad picture आपको पता सकती है that okay, there was something of Australia, UK and US agreeing that they will share nuclear submarine technology with each other. UK and US both nuclear submarine owning powers, they said we will give nuclear submarines to Australia, but this was a part of their military information technology sharing understanding, which is a part of a larger military alliance kind of a thing. But India is not a part of AUKUS, and India said that Quad is not a military alliance. Right? So questions related to AUKUS, Quad are asked. इसके पहले एक बार जब मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, couple of years ago, 2017 and 18, the RCEP was in discussion, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a free trade agreement involving China, the United States, China and ASEAN plus, or what we say, the ASEAN plus 6. India negotiated in RCEP, but India did not sign the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. When India did not sign the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, question came on RCEP. Why India did not sign? What are India's concerns with RCEP? तो आपको ये पता होना चाहिए, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership had a major China angle to it, and so it becomes extremely important for India. Tomorrow, if India and European Union go ahead and sign a free trade agreement, which has been in discussion for a long time now, then it will definitely become important for your exam. तो एक चीज आपको पता होना चाहिए, एक ब्रॉड गेज आपको पता होना चाहिए कि ये चीजें, इसके अलावा भी चीजें पूछी जा सकती हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, and US maybe there are issues. The China issue is one issue, the Russia issue is one issue, then there is the India-US trade related issues, जो बार बार WTO disputes also it partly leads to. There is the issue of Indian workers in USA, the Indian diaspora, their H1B visa issues and all those issues. तो वो भी एक हैं issues. Indian-US defense relationship is also there. वैसे ही रशिया में. So anyways, these countries are also extremely important और यहां से questions आते हैं. Okay. Now, apart from this, एक last area अगर मैं बता दूं आपको, तो फिर एक broadly question आ सकता है एक superficial level पे इंडिया अफ्रीका relationship से भी और इंडिया लैटिन अमेरिका relationship से भी. Okay, Latin America is often called in Indian foreign policy as a forgotten continent. Okay, in the sense कि we often do not pay much attention to it. तो थोड़ा उस पे से भी क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. मेंस में भी आ सकता है, और अगर मेंस में नहीं आता है तो प्रीलिम्स में डेफिनेटली आ सकता है. अफ्रीका इज गोइंग टू बिकम मोर एंड मोर इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर द वर्ल्ड ऑल्सो, इंक्लूडिंग फॉर इंडिया. तो क्वेश्चन वहां से भी आ सकता है. डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन और इंडिया अफ्रीका रिलेशनशिप भी आ सकता है मेंस में, और प्रीलिम्स में भी मैप बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस आ सकते हैं. ओके, so and these map based questions are around the important developments in Africa. Okay, for example, about the location of Djibouti or Djibouti's neighbors. क्वेश्चन आ चुका है पहले भी. अभी जिबूती कहां है अफ्रीका के मैप में, आपको पता होना चाहिए. क्यों? क्योंकि इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट. ओके, बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स इंपॉर्टेंस. सो ब्रॉड आइडिया आपको होना चाहिए. ठीक है, ये नहीं होना चाहिए कि हाँ अफ्रीका में जिबूती कहीं है. ठीक है, थोड़ा और एक बेसिक लेवल पे आगे जाके आपको पता होना चाहिए. केन्या, वाई? बिकॉज इन केन्या देयर इज अ लार्ज इंडियन डायस्पोरा इन केन्या. ओके, तो आपको पता होना चाहिए वेयर इज केन्या. यू शुड नो. अच्छा, इथोपिया में कुछ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट चल रहा है, तो वेयर इज इथोपिया. यू शुड नो दैट मोरक्को में कुछ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट चल रहा है, तो न्यूज़पेपर में आता है ना, इन मोरक्को देयर इज अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑनगोइंग, यूएस हैज रिकॉग्नाइज्ड मोरक्कोस कंट्रोल ओवर वेस्टर्न सहारा. आपको यह पता होना चाहिए मोरक्को कहां है, मोरक्को के नेबर्स कौन कौन है, ट्यूनीशिया कहां है. ओके, क्यों? बिकॉज ये चीजें वो पूछना बड़ा पसंद करते हैं इन प्रीलिम्स. दे लाइक टू आस्क दीज थिंग्स इन प्रीलिम्स बिकॉज एज अ स्टूडेंट ऑफ जनरल स्टडीज you should have basic awareness about where this country is located, what is broadly the conflict about, and does it have any direct implications for India. There's a Yemeni conflict ongoing between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Other parties are also involved in it. लेकिन आपको एक ब्रॉड, आपको डिटेल नहीं कि अच्छा हूती रिबेल्स आर सपोर्टिंग देम, सऊदी अरेबिया सपोर्टिंग दिस, ये नहीं. लेकिन आपको ये पता होना चाहिए वेयर इज येमेन प्लेस्ड ऑन द मैप, हु आर येमेन्स नेबर्स. ओके, क्यों? क्योंकि प्रीलिम्स में यही क्वेश्चंस पूछे जाते हैं. व्हेन द सीरियन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट वाज एट इट्स पीक एंड बशर अल असद वाज द हेड ऑफ द सीरियन स्टेट एंड देयर वाज द अटेम्प्ट टू ओवरथ्रो बशर अल असद, तो सीरियन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जब हो रहा था तो क्वेश्चन ये पूछा था प्रीलिम्स में दैट व्हिच ऑफ द कंट्रीज डू नॉट शेयर अ बॉर्डर विद सीरिया. बच्चे आर लाइक नहीं सर, वहां ये मिसाइल लगी है, वहां ये मिसाइल लगी है, उसकी ये मिसाइल लगी है, वो ये मिसाइल चला रहा है. आपको नहीं चलानी है मिसाइल. आपको ये पता होना चाहिए सीरिया शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर विद इराक, इट शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर विद टर्की, इट शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर्स विद विच ऑफ द कंट्रीज. व्हाई? इसका भी रीजन है, क्योंकि the neighbors are always going to be directly affected, firstly by ongoing conflict, and how the neighbors respond to a conflict is going to be decided by their own interest. Now India did not have any major interests in Syria because we do not buy a large amount of oil from Syria, nor do Indian workers or Indian students study in Syria in large numbers. But when the Yemeni conflict happened, India did evacuate a large number of people from Yemen because Indian workers were working in Yemen. तो आपको ये पता होना चाहिए क्या, एक ब्रॉड ज्योग्राफिकल अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ ऑल दीज रीजन्स. ये प्रीलिम्स में काम आता है. इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि यू स्टार्ट स्टडीइंग एवरी इंटरनेशनल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इन डिटेल. कॉन्फ्लिक्ट की डिटेल्स नहीं पूछी जाएंगी आपसे, ठीक, अनलेस इट इज समथिंग हैपनिंग इन साउथ एशिया. वहां पे भी नहीं पूछते हैं, लेकिन डेफिनेटली यहां से तो नहीं पूछेंगे. ठीक है, तो ये इज द ब्रॉड ओरिएंटेशन एंड अप्रोच दैट यू शुड कीप. मैम हैज डिस्कस पाकिस्तान विथ यू. शी इज ऑल्सो गोइंग टू डिस्कस यूएसए, चाइना एंड पार्टली रशिया एज वेल. ठीक है, बाकी सारी जो भी चीजें हैं वो मैं डिस्कस करूंगा. ठीक है, बट ऑल्सो प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड देयर इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी अ सर्टेन अमाउंट ऑफ ओवरलैप, क्योंकि ये होता ही है. ऐसा नहीं है कि यू नो आरसीपी है तो आरसीपी वहां होगा यहां होगा. बट मैम एनीवेज इज गोइंग टू पेंट दैट ब्रॉडर पिक्चर ऑन द मेजर पार्ट्स. शी इज ऑलरेडी पेंटेड टू यू अ ब्रॉड पिक्चर ऑन नेबरहुड एंड देन स्पेसिफिकली डिस्कसिंग पाकिस्तान, राइट. सो ये यही है न्यूक्लियस ऑफ इंडियन फॉरेन पॉलिसी. ये 3-4 कंट्री में ही संसार समाया इंडियन फॉरेन पॉलिसी का, बाकी सब तो अपेंडेजेस है. क्वेश्चन आते हैं वहां से, so that is why. And as I'm telling, what I'll be discussing with you is ऑलवेज ऑन एग्जाम ओरिएंटेड अप्रोच, इधर उधर का ज्यादा कहानी वानी का हमारे पास समय नहीं है, ठीक। सेकेंडली, आई whatever I write, you can write with me. I'll also be providing handouts as and when classes keep happening, जिस भी टॉपिक पे। बहुत कोई बुक पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है IR में। You don't need to read any book. Don't waste your time on any book. Do as much as we are doing in the class. Whatever handouts we are giving, just refer to that. For subjects like polity, history, economy, geography, it's worthwhile to read a book. Why? Because the weightage of the subject must determine whether you read a book for that topic or not. वहां पे पढ़ने के लिए बहुत बुक्स हैं, एंड ट्रस्ट मी आप बोर भी नहीं होंगे उसमें, है ना। यहाँ पे आप पढ़ते रहेंगे, कोई सवाल नहीं आता है किसी बुक से, क्योंकि ऑल बुक्स आर रिटन इन अ हिस्टोरिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट, और क्वेश्चन आता है करंट से, ठीक है। लेकिन हिस्टोरिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट समझने के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है, दैट विल एक्सप्लेन टू यू। डन, चलिए लेट्स स्टार्ट नाउ। What I'm going to first do with you is एक broad, in the first 1 or 2 lectures I'm going to quickly run you through the broader maps, क्योंकि मैं बार बार ये बोलूंगा कि अच्छा वहां ये हो रहा था, आप बोल रहे हैं हाँ हाँ हो रहा होगा, वो वहां कहाँ है ये नहीं पता है, right? So we don't need to do that. And also in the prelims I think they've given you one handout. The soft copy also will be uploaded, but I think there are 3 or 4 more handouts वो आपको कल मिल जाएंगे, okay? Which are, for example, there's one on Southeast Asia, there's one on East Asia, there's one on West Asia, there's one on Central Asia. इसमें कुछ नहीं लिखना है, सिर्फ समझना है, मैप्स देखने हैं और विजुअली आपको याद रखना है, because prelims oriented questions इससे आते हैं। Once you have this map based understanding, the issues become very difficult, very easy to negotiate. So you have what, Southeast Asia, right? Okay. So देखिए, when you talk about the Southeast Asia aspect, आप बार बार एक चीज की बात करेंगे, आसियान, right? Whenever you will talk about India's Southeast Asian neighbors, the association of Southeast Asian nations often comes into the picture. और ये इंडिया चाइना में भी आएगा, हर जगह आएगा। तो पहली बात आपको, वन थिंग दैट यू शुड ऑलवेज रिमेंबर इज, जो प्रीलिम्स में क्वेश्चंस आते हैं, देखिए बच्चे कई बार पूछते हैं सर इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। आई विल टेल यू, इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस आर इंपॉर्टेंट, बट यू शुड नो in prelims if they ask you a question on international organizations, there are only 2-3 things that you need to remember. Firstly, if an organization is formed, basic things about where it's, if it's the case, where its headquarters are located or something like when was it formed, basic factual things. इसमें मैं दिमाग भी नहीं लगाऊंगा अपना, है ना, मैं आपको बताऊंगा, उससे आप समझ जाएंगे। नेक्स्ट, यू शुड नो की मेंबर, key member what countries, who are the key member countries of any particular organizations. Then you should also, तो ये इसके अराउंड चीजें okay are often asked in prelims examination. Okay, members पे पूछ लेते हैं, या फिर if there is any major declaration associated with, if there is any major what declaration associated with that organization. For example, if there is the Delhi Declaration associated with any important regional organization, then they'll ask you that what was this declaration about. तो ये कुछ बेसिक फैक्चुअल चीजें जो आती हैं प्रीलिम्स में। एक और चीज जो आ सकती है वो है, एज आई कीप सेइंग, मैप बेस्ड। तो ये 3-4 चीजें तो पूछी जाती हैं काय में, प्रीलिम्स में। ओके, बिकॉज आई एम टेलिंग यू 1 to 2 क्वेश्चंस इन अ ईयर और मैक्सिमम 3 क्वेश्चंस इन अ ईयर इन प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन कैन कम फ्रॉम दिस मैप बेस्ड अंडरस्टैंडिंग, ठीक है। बट इट विल हेल्प यू इन अदर प्लेसेस ऑल्सो। देखिए, जब भी हम आसियान की बात करते हैं तो देर आर दीज 10 कंट्रीज ऑफ आसियान विच आर टॉक्ड अबाउट। रटने की कभी जरूरत नहीं है मेंबरशिप। Always remember, most organizations are geographically proximate to each other. ठीक है. अब इसमें if you look about ASEAN, the story about ASEAN goes is this, that ASEAN was formed in 1967. The primary reason why ASEAN was formed was what? Why? Because it was which period? The Cold War period. ठीक है. And during the Cold War period, कुछ खास लिखने फिकने की जरूरत नहीं है, वहां मत पढ़िए, उस डॉक्यूमेंट को रख दीजिए, घर जाके पढ़ लेना. जो डॉक्यूमेंट मैंने आपको दिया है इसलिए दिया है कि आपको लिखना ना पड़े. अभी जहां लिखना है वहां मैं डिक्टेट करूंगा. When it comes to a conceptual part which is worth writing, I'll dictate everything. I'll write, you'll write with me. Right now, you don't need to bang your head too much on writing. This is where, during the Cold War era, 1967, during the Cold War era, there is the Soviet Union and the United States. They are the two major global powers. Now, the competition is both want to increase their influence. Where? In the developing world. डेवलपिंग वर्ल्ड जो शब्द है ये उनके लिए था जो कंट्रीज अब डीकोलोनाइज हो रही थी. कंट्रीज विच हैड बीन डीकोलोनाइज्ड वर न्यूली इंडिपेंडेंट कंट्रीज. एवरीबॉडी, यूएस as well as Soviet Union, wanted them to join their club. US said, join our capitalist democratic model of economic growth and free trade and multi-party elections. And the Soviet Union said, what? Join our model of growth, which is a state-led model of economic growth also, as or a state-owned ownership model of economy, and also having a single party, that is the Communist Party, and elections within the Communist Party. Now, मैं आपको ये सब इसलिए बता रहा हूं क्योंकि कॉन्टेक्स्ट हमेशा इंपॉर्टेंट है. 1949, which country turned towards communism? China. इन सब का नेबर कौन है? China. I'll show you the exact maps later. But 1949, China becomes communist. Once China becomes communist, China is also whose neighbor? Soviet Union. The Americans are extremely concerned because to America, the point is very clear that the Soviet Union has supported also, and overall, partly because of Soviet Union support and partly because of the Communist Party within China, the communists have taken over China. If the communists have taken over China, the next logical area where communism will seek expansion is in Southeast Asia. The Americans often said that communism is a disease, okay, and you need to contain its spread. To contain its spread, if you don't take steps, then communism will spread from one country to another. This was also called as the domino effect theory, that if one card falls, the whole castle will fall, other cards will also fall. Once today China has fallen, next Vietnam can go, then Malaysia can go, then Indonesia can go, and the whole of Southeast Asia will also turn communist. And it is at this point that many of these Southeast Asian countries chose that they wanted to take attempts or take steps to ensure that communist guerrillas do not take over power in Malaysia, in Indonesia. Okay, and countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand were at the forefront of leading the formation of this group of nations which will not join the communist bloc. So ASEAN as a group was formed for building closer relations with US, but primarily to keep communism from taking over Southeast Asia. ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट हमेशा पता होना चाहिए, क्योंकि हमें यही नहीं पता होता कि ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनी क्यों थी. ऐसी थोड़ी है कि भाई बगल बगल में है, आओ बनाए ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. Every organization is formed with a purpose in mind. ASEAN was formed with this primary purpose of resisting or limiting the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Okay, that's one context firstly for you to know. Now, in these ASEAN group of countries, one of the ways of understanding is that eventually other Southeast Asian countries also joined ASEAN grouping, but the major powers of ASEAN have always been Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, okay, and then there have been Thailand and Philippines and also, but Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore are the major economic powerhouses of where? Southeast Asia. Why I'm saying the economic powerhouse is important? Because the size of the economic size of a country often gives it a say in the international arena. Within Southeast Asia, these were the major economies. If you know, Singapore has had previously been a British colony. Okay. If you know about the Malay Peninsula or Indonesia also, there have been European colonies previously. Okay. They had primarily relations with the West to begin with. But in these countries, there is a big Chinese diaspora also, Chinese origin people also. So that is why the fear was that there will be a communist takeover in these countries. It did not happen. But Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore were at the forefront of forming ASEAN. Later, other countries also joined ASEAN. One is the group of countries which share border with what? China, which share a direct land border with China. ये तीनों कंट्रियों का कोई लैंड बॉर्डर नहीं है चाइना के साथ. बट इफ यू लुक फॉर एग्जांपल म्यांमार, if you look at Myanmar, if you look at Laos, if you look at Vietnam, they all have a land border with China. Cambodia is also there, but Cambodia doesn't have a, sorry, this is Thailand. Cambodia is also there, but Cambodia doesn't have a land border with China. ये चीजें पता होनी चाहिए. मैं देखिए क्यों आपको इतना इंपॉर्टेंट होता है लैंड बॉर्डर होना. in IR a common principle is said that location is a very important determinant of foreign policy. For example, Afghanistan. Does India have a land border with Afghanistan? Not currently, given that there is Indian claimed territories are occupied by Pakistan. Because of those reasons, whatever, India doesn't have a direct physical land border with Afghanistan. That means India cannot send its troops in Afghanistan directly. India cannot do direct trade with Afghanistan. Indian people cannot travel to Afghanistan directly, nor can the same be done by the Afghan side. So why am I saying this? If you share a land border with a country, then automatically that is an important determinant of relations. The only Southeast Asian country with whom India shares the border is, land border is Myanmar. So it is extremely important for India. ऐसे नहीं है कि कंट्री एकदम से इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाती है और एकदम से नहीं हो जाती. बांग्लादेश, जैसे आपने ये कंट्रीज पढ़ी है ना अभी, इसलिए मैं इसके बारे में बात कर रहा हूं. बांग्लादेश इज सराउंडेड बाय इंडिया फ्रॉम 3 sides, almost to the tune of having a boundary of 4,000 kilometers. What is the significance of this? Is that Bangladesh cannot escape one geographical fact, that the only other country it shares a land border with apart from India is with whom? Myanmar. So Bangladesh cannot hope to antagonize which country? India. Okay. तो ये इसीलिए बार बार ये बोला जाता है कि geography is a very big determinant of foreign policy also, and that is why I am stressing this fact that many of these countries like Laos, Vietnam, or Myanmar, for example, have shared land border with China. They did enter the ASEAN group. Whom? The CMLV countries they are called: Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam. Okay. तो ये कितनी कंट्रीज हो गई अभी? 4 + 3 7 7 4 + 3 7. Apart from this, there is another country which is in many ways, which is in many ways considered one of the only colonies of, one of the few colonies of which power, or which was earlier one of the few colonies of which power? The United States. Though US is known normally for not having any colonies, but Philippines has been an erstwhile colony of the United States. Even when Philippines ceased to be a colony of United States, The US military continues to maintain a strong presence in Philippines even to this day. US has an overseas military base in Philippines. So Philippines also joined ASEAN. It's understandable, right? क्योंकि यूएस से अच्छे रिलेशन है, आसियान कंट्रीज विल हैव गुड रिलेशंस विद whom? यूएस. इसके बाद ये छोटा मोटा ब्रुनाई, राइट? नाउ देयर आर ब्रुनाई. ब्रुनाई इज द स्मॉल किंगडम. कई आप लोगों ने नहीं देखा होगा ना, ये सब यही सब पूछते हो कि मलेशिया important islands. Malaysia has a large number of islands. So has Indonesia. But where is Brunei located? Alongside, sharing the border with which of the islands of Malaysia? अब ये सारी चीजें ज्योग्राफी में आप ब्रॉड देख सकते हैं, वो आप बाद में you will see also. But I'm telling you what to focus on. Brunei is an important kingdom. It's one of the monarchies, few monarchies in Southeast Asia, which till to this day functions as a monarchy, and it also is having petroleum reserves, because of which it maintains a good financial health of its economy. That's another story. But Brunei bhi ek country hai which is a part of what? ASEAN group of countries. So, and obviously Thailand. तो ये हो गया आपका what? ASEAN. If you may know, then Vietnam eventually became what? A communist power. After 73-74, Vietnam became a communist power. But Vietnam was also keen on joining ASEAN. Why? Because Vietnam has also had conflicts in the past with China. Okay, that's another story. But though Vietnam was, out of these 10 countries, Vietnam is the only state which has historically been a communist power. It also decided to join ASEAN, and slowly and steadily the membership of the base of ASEAN was expanded to these 10 countries. Now, ASEAN group of countries are also, in today's world, what has happened? The Soviet Union is gone. The Cold War is gone. Then India gave a look-east policy, etc. We'll talk about it. But India gave a look-east policy in 92-93 when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, Narasimha Rao was the prime minister, the LPG reforms happened, India faced a balance of payment crisis, बहुत सारी चीजें होनी थी. 92 में एक सिंपल भाषा में हमारे पास जेब में पैसा नहीं था. And India looked towards increasing economic engagement with ASEAN group of countries. And from then on, the economic engagement with ASEAN group of countries has actually increased over time. Now, over time, however, once the Soviet Union was gone, what has happened? That today in the 21st century, we say a new bipolar era is emerging, which is that new bipolar era between the US and China. देखिए ऐसा बोलते हैं ना कि पहले सर कोल्ड वॉर था तो वहां पे यूएस एंड Soviet Union had this bipolar era. Then Soviet Union collapsed, so we had a unipolar era. So 1990 to what we say almost till 2010 was a unipolar era where China was rising. However, USA was still the predominant power. Okay. And after 2010-12, we say now it is again a bipolar era, but now the two poles are US and China. Who's dealing with this new bipolar world? ASEAN and India and the whole world. Right? Now, this is the context जो आपको पहले पता होना चाहिए, पढ़ बाद में लेंगे, that ASEAN, if the previous concern of ASEAN was to limit whom? Soviet presence. Now, partly the concern of ASEAN is also to limit Chinese presence. But that's one part of the story. To limit Chinese presence, the ASEAN group of countries have often relied on a closer relation with the United States. But in international relations, it's often said that please don't take your friends too seriously. Okay. That just because a very common axiom is that countries should always seek to diversify their relationship. Okay. And not have major dependence on any one country. So while ASEAN countries, as we'll see, there is the first island chain, second island chain, बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, मैं बताऊंगा अभी आपको, ठीक है. And USA, for example, has military presence in Philippines. USA has troop presence in Taiwan. Or USA has troop presence in Japan. And in many of these Southeast Asian countries, US troops or US Navy is present. But USA is thousands of kilometers away from Southeast Asia. What separates USA from Southeast Asia? The Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean is बहुत दूर. So a common concern of ASEAN countries have been, ASEAN countries, as we'll see, have naval or maritime disputes, जो आप सबने सुना होगा कुछ, South China Sea, East China Sea. Many of these ASEAN countries have maritime disputes with whom? China. And they have often relied on close relations with USA. But ASEAN countries are well aware that USA is sitting far away. A proximal neighbor which also has disputes or border disputes with China and is a major power is whom? India. So there is a reason that India also has some of the same concerns in dealing with China and often has a similar nature of relationship with US. So there is reason, ये बात समझे आप, हम अपना सॉफ्टवेयर एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं ना यूएस को. इंडिया यूएसए हैव इकोनॉमिक रिलेशनशिप and a deep economic relationship today that almost USA is one of the biggest trading partners of India. 130, 140, even 150 billion US dollars of trade happens annually between India and USA. ASEAN countries also have significant trade with USA. US military presence is there in many of the ASEAN group of countries. ASEAN countries have concerns with the assertive China. So has India. So India and ASEAN are brought together by the logic of what? A rising China. That's one. But also by the logic of geography. अरे बगल बगल में ना. Geography is everything in IR. If not everything, a very big thing in IR. And we often discount the role of geography. अरे क्या हो रहा है यूक्रेन में? यूएस वहां बैठा नहीं जाएगा वो यूक्रेन तक, बहुत दूर. ठीक है. बांग्लादेश knows that whatever its concerns are with India, it will have to address them directly with India. India surrounds Bangladesh from three sides. That is the logic of geography. The same in Bhutan, the same in Nepal. Okay. So the same thing is in ASEAN. ASEAN countries are well aware that India has significant naval capabilities. India has significant concerns with China. India is the immediate proximate neighbor of ASEAN countries. So it is good for ASEAN countries that they don't put all their eggs in the American basket. Maybe they can put some in terms of having a good relations with India as well. वो ट्रेड इकोनॉमी वो सब तो है, लेकिन ये भी इज अ बिगर एस्पेक्ट. दैट इज व्हाई नाउ आई कैन सिंपली कीप टेलिंग यू कि ये कंट्री ने ये अब ज्वाइन किया, ये अब ज्वाइन किया, ये अब ज्वाइन किया. आप पढ़ लीजिएगा जाके. ठीक है. आई एम टेलिंग यू ये कंट्री में विच कंट्री ज्वाइंड इन विच ईयर इज नॉट इंपॉर्टेंट टू रिमेंबर. ठीक है. बस आपको ये चार चीजों पे ध्यान रखना है अगर प्री के लिए है. Where is the headquarters? When was it formed? The key members, the major declarations, if any, and a map-based understanding. Now, नाम दे दिया मैंने. कई लोग यही पढ़ते रहते हैं जॉइंट मिलिट्री एक्सरसाइज के नाम, गरुड़ा, वरोड़ा, मालाबार. कोई नहीं पूछता है नॉर्मली. जो बड़ी मेजर लैंडमार्क मिलिट्री एक्सरसाइज है, लाइक द मिलान ग्रुप ऑफ एक्सरसाइजेस एंड द मालाबार ग्रुप ऑफ एक्सरसाइजेस है, उसी की बात होती है, ठीक है। लेकिन आई हैव जस्ट गिवन इट सो दैट आप बाद में इन्हें बोले सर ये तो हुआ ही नहीं, ठीक है। नाउ लेट मी कम टू समथिंग दैट आई वांट टू काइंड ऑफ ड्रॉ योर अटेंशन टू। इसमें से कुछ कुछ चीजें आपने पहले ही पढ़ रखी होंगी अभी तक बांग्लादेश के केस में और वो, तो आई एम टेकिंग ड्रॉइंग योर अटेंशन टू द अदर हैंडआउट, वो अभी शायद आपको मिला नहीं है तो कल मिल जाएगा, बट मैप बेस्ड अंडरस्टैंडिंग, ये देखिए एक रीजन से बता रहा हूं मैं सब कुछ क्योंकि इवेंचुअली इट विल हेल्प। आई लव दिस मैप, मेरे हिसाब से इट्स अ वेरी यूजफुल मैप टू अंडरस्टैंड एवरीथिंग ऑन व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इन साउथ ईस्ट एशिया एंड चाइना। नाउ ये क्या है? मंगोलिया, रशिया, राइट। सो चाइना, मंगोलिया एंड रशिया, ये तो क्लियर है आपको। ये क्या है? म्यांमार, थाईलैंड, वियतनाम। नाउ लाओस, कंबोडिया, वो सब ठीक है। दिस इज मलेशिया, दिस इज मलेशिया, दिस इज इंडोनेशिया। यहां पे दिस द सिटी स्टेट ऑफ सिंगापुर एंड इनके बीच में क्या है? मलक्का स्ट्रेट। Malacca Strait is the important naval choke point, right? The Malacca Strait is the important naval choke point, a lot of maritime trade connecting Indian Ocean region to the South China Sea, and East China Sea happens through which strait? The Malacca Strait, situated between Malaysia and Indonesia, and also यहाँ पे सिंगापुर, है ना? ठीक है। अब आपने मलक्का स्ट्रेट, लॉम्बॉक स्ट्रेट, सुंडा स्ट्रेट सब पढ़ लिया? नहीं पढ़ा, मैं पढ़ा दूंगा, टेंशन नहीं। बट दिस इज पहले एक चीज जो आपको पता होना चाहिए, तो मतलब बेसिक शब्द है, दिस इज द बेसिक लैंग्वेज ऑफ IR दैट यू शुड नो। विच इज दिस कंट्री? यस, ताइवान। व्हाट इज दिस? फिलीपींस, है ना? What is this? What is this? What is this? What is this? कुरिल आइलैंड, ठीक है। अब पहले आपको एक पता होना चाहिए, एक तो क्या है? ईस्ट चाइना सी, ईस्ट चाइना सी इज वेयर? ईस्ट ऑफ चाइना। साउथ चाइना सी इज साउथ ऑफ चाइना। अब आप अगर एक चीज मैं आपको बताऊं पहले, ये सब इंडोनेशिया है बाय द वे, ऑल ऑफ दिस इज इंडोनेशिया, ये सब इंडोनेशिया के ग्रुप ऑफ आइलैंड, यहाँ पापुआ न्यू गिनी एंड ऑल दोस थिंग्स आर देयर। ये गुआम है, इज अ आइलैंड, गुआम इज अ आइलैंड in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which since 1942 is in US control. US military is based in Guam. US has an overseas naval base in Guam. US has a naval base in Philippines. US has military presence in Taiwan. Needless to say, US military is based in Japan. So also, as I said, so let me kind of elaborate this firstly for you. We often call these as a group of first island chain and second island chain. First island chain and second island chain. ये कहां से आई पूरी कहानी? Where again this all everything goes back to the Cold War. ना उतना तो जाना ही है पीछे आपको समझने की. That during the Cold War, the Americans are concerned about what? Soviets. and then the Chinese, because Chinese have also turned communists. Now, the Americans have previously dealt with idhar pe kisse? Neither the Soviet nor Chinese, but with whom? Yes, during World War II, the Soviets dealt with, the Americans fought against whom? Japan. And Japan became a big headache. For whom? The United States. आप सबने वो सुना होगा, पर्ल हार्बर अटैक हुआ, है ना, all of that. And the nuclear bomb attack, whatever. In this whole period, the Japanese and the Americans were fighting for domination over the Pacific Ocean. Where? During World War II. The question is, and as we keep saying, majority of world trade happens through oceans. Even today, 92% of the whole value of the world trade happens through oceanic route. The one who controls the oceans controls the trade. The world who trade the power who controls the trade will control the world economy. ठीक है? So Japan wanted to establish its control in the Pacific Oceans. Where? During World War II. तो जापान ने क्या किया था World War II में? Japan went left, right, center, everywhere in Pacific. देखिए, ये सारी चीजें हमें पढ़ते नहीं है, तो हमें लगता है कि we often don't know the significance of what is. Japan attacked whom? During World War II, if you go and read a bit of history of World War II, Japanese went ahead and attacked Philippines. जापान ने पहले ही ले लिया था, अरे सब साउथ, नॉर्थ, ईस्टर्न, सब ले लिया जापान ने. कब? During World War II. 1939 to 1945, the Japanese went Guam. The Japanese went Australia. तब जापान ने बोला भाई हम हैं Asia for Asians. We are the leader of Asia. Japan went ahead establishing domination, attempting to establish domination over all these group of islands in the Pacific. However, as history tells, that Americans defeated the Japanese, and as they defeated the Japanese, who is now placing their military here? The Americans. Okay. And because they want to have a controlling influence over the Pacific Ocean. Now the thing is that American landmass is thousands of kilometers away from the Pacific. So that is why a group of islands here, especially Guam is one of those islands, yahan aur bhi kai islands hai, which are uninhabited islands. Nobody lives on these islands. However, the American military and navy is present on these islands. Okay. Why are these islands important for America? Is because if they have to launch an attack tomorrow on China or on Russia or anywhere in the Pacific, they will not get their troops all the way from US West Coast. They will use their troops stationed in these bases. This will be their first line of attack in dealing with whom? China or Russia in the Pacific Ocean. When World War II happened, the Americans had to fight island by island to capture these islands from whom? Japanese. Americans captured Guam from Japanese in 1942, and this turned their battle against the Japanese. Okay, so ये सारे islands का बहुत important significance है, because it allows US Navy to operate far away from its borders, and from there launch immediate attacks if needed to control an assertive power. Okay, which challenges obviously US domination or US allies in the region. That is why this is important, ये context. तो जब ये पूरी कहानी अगर आपको समझ में आई, तो Americans said we need to have our military presence surrounding the Soviets. Now there are no Soviets, but there are the Chinese. Saying to surrounding the Soviets and the Chinese, our first and second line of defense to tackle Soviet or Chinese aggression. How interesting it is. though मैं ये शब्द बार बार आपके सामने यूज करता रहूंगा and you will also keep accepting it unquestionably, is to deter Soviet and Chinese aggression, because US is the benign power here. ये हम नहीं समझते कई बार जब हम पॉलिटिकल थ्योरी बोलते हैं, पढ़ते हैं और पढ़ाते हैं, तो we say the one who establishes the rules often claims to be the benign power fighting against the aggressor. भैया आप अपनी नेवी यहां हजारों किलोमीटर दूर लाके इनकी आजादी बचाने के लिए आप लड़ रहे, fighting for somebody else's freedom thousands of kilometers away, sending and saying we will establish the rules. So this is often hegemony. You never question hegemony. आपको लगता है हाँ अच्छा ही तो कर रहे हैं, right? So but even keeping in line with that narrative for now, the Americans said we have to have naval presence where in one group of islands which will be the first line of defense against an assertive China. And if the Chinese in some way cross these first group of islands, we have a second line of defense also. Okay. So this first group of island in South Korea, the American Navy is stationed in South Korea. In fact, South Korea comes under the nuclear umbrella of the United States. US is treaty bound to protect South Korea in case of a nuclear attack. South Korea doesn't have nuclear weapons. Japan doesn't have nuclear weapons. China has nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear. Russia has. Ukraine doesn't have. Russia has. क्या हुआ? Right. So the American military is stationed in South Korea currently. The American military is stationed in South Korea. It is stationed where? Taiwan. It is stationed where? Philippines. And it is also stationed where? Malaysia. This is the first line of defense that US military has to tackle China in case of any military confrontation in the South China Sea or in the East China Sea. But and that is why what allows Taiwan to punch much above its weight is its relations with US. But Taiwan knows. देखिए ये सब जो आप पढ़ रहे होंगे तो आपने कहीं सुना होगा, पढ़ा होगा कि if Russia can do this to Ukraine, then China can do this to Taiwan. Okay. Americans' defense is this, that say Ukraine is not our treaty partner under NATO, but we are treaty bound to Taiwan. And it will be a great test of American seriousness towards its allies that if China, and by Pentagon's own internal assessment, it is argued that before 2027, China will make the move, and this is not during Ukraine, it was made in the last year itself, that before 2027, China will make a move on Taiwan. Okay, this is their internal assessment, American intelligence internal assessment. But the idea is this, that this is their first line of defense. Technically speaking, the American Navy can launch simultaneous coordinated attacks on China, restricting China within the South China Sea, preventing it from entering fully into the Pacific. If this falls, then the second line of defense of China is to rely on Japan and Guam in the region where its navy is stationed, both in Japan and Guam. So these are called the first and the second island chains, whose primary purpose is to ensure that China doesn't assert itself too strongly or threaten US hegemony in the region. This is the broad context. तो ये आपको पहले पता होना चाहिए. अब यहाँ पे आपने साउथ चाइना सी और ईस्ट चाइना सी का नाम तो सुना ही है, राइट? नाउ हियर लेट मी, है ना इंटरेस्टिंग मैप? हमें लग रहा है कि रटना है, ये है वो है, ज्यादा है ही नहीं आईआर में रटने का. आईआर इज वन ऑफ द इजीएस्ट सब्जेक्ट्स. देयर आर मोर डिफिकल्ट थिंग्स टू स्टडी. एंड एक बार आपने समझ लिया, इट्स नॉट दैट डिफिकल्ट. प्रीलिम्स में और प्रीलिम्स में दे कैन ऑलवेज बी अ क्वेश्चन दैट व्हाट डज द फर्स्ट एंड सेकंड आइलैंड चेन रेफर टू. क्यों है ये कॉन्सेप्ट आया था? दिस इज गिवन बाय अमेरिकन फॉरेन पॉलिसी experts, including John Foster Dulles, who was one of the American foreign policy formulators during the Cold War. ठीक है, तो अब हमारे लिए ये क्यों इंपॉर्टेंट है, हम क्यों जानना चाह रहे हैं? there is the Malacca Strait. The trade happens through Malacca Strait connecting to the Indian Ocean region. This trade then passes where? Through the South China Sea region. Through where? The Taiwan Strait. Where is major Chinese cities located? In Western China, Southern China, Eastern China. Eastern or Southeastern China. From Shanghai to almost all of them. This is the route of international trade. Where? In Southeast Asia. Now, if you see closely, then what? And if you look at Japan, Japan is hugely dependent on energy imports. Is China dependent on energy imports? Yes or no? More than 60% of Chinese energy supplies also are based on imports. So are that of Japan. South Korea, its exports, the Japanese exports, when they're happening in Asia, etc., they go from here. Now, in this South China Sea, there are territorial disputes between China and a number of Southeast Asian states, and so are they are in East China Sea. South China Sea, man, this has been asked before in the prelims examination. There is which of the group of islands which are contested? The Spratly and the Paracel group of islands. ये क्या है? ये देखिए, this is a zoomed in map of where? This is a zoomed in map of the South China Sea. South और East दोनों बताया. This is of South. Paracel and Spratly. Nobody lives on these islands. They are largely uninhabited. Okay. The Chinese claim that the whole of South China Sea is China's sea. Okay. And basically, this is all Chinese territory. The famous or the infamous 9-dashed line or a tongue-shaped line with the Chinese say shows the extent of Chinese territory. Where? In the South China Sea. China says that all these islands here, they all are a part of Chinese territory, and so the surrounding waters are also a part of Chinese territory. Meaning, every ship which is passing through where? Through the South China Sea is passing through Chinese territory, and thus China will now, and thus basically जब आप पढ़ते हैं तो though China does not really abide by the UNCLOS agreement and the United Nations Convention on Seas, it is often said that using these routes for trade or for an uninterrupted passage of goods is the right of every country. Okay, तो इसको हम बार बार एक चीज में डिवाइड करते हैं, एक्सक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक जोन, टेरिटोरियल वाटर्स, एक्सक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक जोन, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, 12 nautical miles and all those things. In the exclusive, so China, so हमें जो चीज समझने की जरूरत है वो ये है that if China's claims on Paracel and Spratly Islands are recognized, then the water surrounding it is an exclusive economic zone of China. Now, from these exclusive economic zones, China can extract whatever oil. There are huge fishing reserves here and oil reserves. So, whether oil reserves or fishing reserves here will become whose property? China. And China will be the sole power which will be allowed to use these reserves as they become Chinese property, as a part of the Chinese state. However, even then, this exclusive economic zone, there will be what? Passage rights to whom? No, passage rights to the ships of every country. So, exclusive economic zone does not prohibit third countries from using the same routes for carrying out their trade. Okay. So basically you cannot deny what? Rights of passage to whom? Other countries also. इसीलिए Americans keep conducting here, आपने एक नाम सुना होगा, freedom of navigation passages. पढ़ते होंगे आप न्यूज़पेपर में. Americans conducted freedom of navigation exercise in South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait. तो Taiwan Strait में Americans are like, हम यहां से अपनी नेवी लेके जाएंगे. It is our right. This is their way of claiming that this is not your exclusive waters. You have exclusive economic rights maybe here, but that doesn't mean that it becomes your territorial water. देखिए जब पानी को डिवाइड करते हैं, देखिए दुनिया काफी विचित्र चीज है. ठीक है, तो देखिए आपने पढ़ा होगा, मैंने पढ़ा था कुछ दिन पहले कि वो इंडिया रिलीज सम इंडेंजर्ड टर्टल्स, वो बांग्लादेश चले गए बॉर्डर क्रॉस करके. कौन बचाएगा उनको? फिर बांग्लादेश बिकम द पार्ट ऑफ अखंड भारत, उनको कौन बचाएगा? कोई नहीं. दे विल बिकम इवन मोर इंडेंजर्ड, उनको वापस लेके भी नहीं आएगा कोई. तो somebody said turtles don't understand international borders. So when we say that if this is the क्या land of any country, तो हम बोलते हैं कुछ 12 नॉटिकल माइल्स तक, वो ऐसे बनाते हैं ना, अपने बुक में डायग्राम देखा होगा सर, वो कॉन्टिनेंटल शेल्फ और स्लोप, और वहां से 12 नॉटिकल माइल्स. दिस इज कॉल्ड टेरिटोरियल. हाँ, जहां से भी वो, इस टेरिटोरियल वाटर्स का कॉन्सेप्ट व्हाट वी से इज दिस, हियर थर्ड कंट्रीज शिप्स कैन नॉट कम without your coast guard giving permission, etc. Okay, so third country ship cannot even pass here. But beyond these, तो यहाँ के resources भी हैं आपके, and the navigation rights here also exclusively belong to the country from their 12 nautical miles from the continental shelf slope, जो भी है. Beyond this, (200 nautical miles), इसमें you have the exclusive economic rights to use the resources, the fishing reserves, oil reserves, whatever are found on exploration here, in case of this, say China, but other countries can also use it for navigational purposes. That's the difference between territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. Why is Andaman and Nicobar so important for India? ऐसे समझ लीजिए ना, ऐसे समझे. हमेशा क्या होता है, दूसरे का नहीं समझ में आता, अपना जल्दी समझ में आ जाता है, राइट? चलिए छोड़िए ऊपर में क्या, राइट? द why are these islands important? Not just because they are close to the Malacca Strait, वो सब ठीक है. Okay, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are located very close to the Malacca Straits, and I'll come to it. But the moment you say that these islands are inhabited by India or Indians, then this water is automatically Indian territory. ठीक है, और यहां से भी 12 नॉटिकल माइल, ठीक है, और 200 नॉटिकल माइल्स. You see, so what happens is this, that even when your islands are partly distanced from your immediate territory, it enlarges your territorial waters as well as the exclusive economic. So the Chinese, when they claim a group of islands in Spratly or in Paracel group of islands in the South China Sea, it enlarges their territorial claims in the South China Sea, as well as gives them exclusive economic rights, as well as a domination over the navigational rights in the region. And that is why the Chinese are keen on claiming this. By the way, this is what is said, but what is often left unsaid is what the Chinese are arguing is that this is a way of them countering what? The American strategy of containing China through their first and second island chain policy. आपने बोला कि अरे वाह, यही बस तोड़ रहे हैं रूल. This is the Chinese response. The Chinese military planners are well aware of the first and second island chain strategy of the Americans, and they want to ensure that China is not boxed in the South China Sea. Okay, so they are going to definitely and surely test whether the Americans have the resolve to stand by their first and second island chain allies. That doesn't mean that China will eventually bomb out all these countries. That's not required. To stand by allies, it can happen in economic terms also, in many other ways as well. So this is about what? The prelims, the Parasil Group of Island is a contested territory between whom and whom? Between Vietnam and China. मैंने बोला था ना अभी थोड़ी देर पहले. They have territorial disputes. India supplying BrahMos missile to Vietnam. सबसे पहले हमने बोला था हम वियतनाम को देंगे, फिलीपींस की तो अभी बात हो रही है. ओके, लेकिन सबसे पहले we said we'll give it to Vietnam. Okay, so it is, that is one context. What I'm trying to say is this, that the Vietnam has been often a strong party which has often resisted China's expansionist aims in the South China Sea. ये प्रीलिम्स में डायरेक्टली पूछा जाता है. Spratly Group of Island is a contested territory between whom and whom. Okay, or Parasil are contested between whom and whom. Spratlys, on the other hand, are these group of islands which are contested between all the powers. Meaning, Vietnam also claims some. More importantly, whom? Philippines. Philippines has an ongoing conflict with China over one specific group of islands, the Scarborough Shoal. The Scarborough Shoal is located west of the Philippines, northwest of the Philippines, and this is also here the Philippines, normally the Philippine native population normally does fishing, etc. And they have historically been doing fishing in the Scarborough Shoal region, but the Chinese said no, 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 it is ours. The Chinese Navy started patrolling in this region. The Philippines protested. The Philippines took the matter to the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice said, yes, this is something that belongs to Philippines. But the Chinese said, we don't care about the International Court of Justice. American said, China is violating the UN clause agreement. Okay. The Chinese said, but you Americans, you never signed the UN clause. USA doesn't abide by UN clause. USA does not abide by UN clause, and it has questioned China not abiding UN clause. तो जो आप कहानी सुनते हैं बार बार, वो अभी देखिए चल रहा है पूरा वेस्ट में नैरेटिव कि रशिया इज सच अ दिस पावर, नॉट caring about human lives, bombing territories, killing innocent civilians. लेकिन आपने भी पढ़ा होगा कि a lot has been happening in the back. अगर आप किसी भी कॉमन जनता से पूछें, then who is somebody who is not preparing for UPSC, you'll be like, oh, Putin is the aggressor and Ukraine is fighting for its survival. But if you go back and look into the history and everything which has been happening, you will find that both sides have their compelling reasons for whatever they're doing. Right? So I'm not saying who's right, who's wrong, forget all of that, but both sides have substantive reasons for what they're doing and why they're doing so. So it's important to place things in a context and understand. So the Philippines have US military presence, but the Scarborough Shoal eventually the Chinese asserted their claims over this. Similarly, on the Parasil group, similarly on the Spratly group of island, Malaysia also claims these territories, Vietnam also, Philippines also, all of them claim the Spratly group of islands. Okay, so this is about broadly these two group of islands. Going where? To the East China Sea. ये आपने ईस्ट चाइना सी में सेनकाकू और डिओहू आइलैंड्स होगा, आपने सुना होगा. जापान. ओके, ये क्या है? ये देखिए, ये Taiwan, this is South Korea, this is Japan, this is which? East China Sea. These group of islands are called the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands, okay, which is contested between China and Japan. ये सीधा सीधा पूछा जाता है प्रीलिम्स में. Senkaku is contested between whom and whom? One liner, okay. It is contested between China and Japan, okay. And again, these are uninhabited islands. The Japanese have historically what? Done shipping, etc., and controlled many of these Diaoyu Islands. However, the Chinese have tried to assert their claims, okay. And the Chinese even declared that they will do navigation in this region, etc. So आपको ये पता होना चाहिए, it's a contested territory between whom and whom. बस इतना. Going north of Japan, between Japan and Russia, there is also a contested group of islands called what? The Kuril Island Group. Kuril, Kuril. ये. These are the group of islands between whom? Japan and Russia. ये सब Sakhalin is a province in Russia. This is Russia, Kamchatka Peninsula and all that. This is Japan. Japan claims all of these Kuril Islands, whereas the Russians also claim most of these Kuril Islands. So this is their contested territory, the Kuril Island Group. तो एक तो ये बड़ा बेसिक आपको पता ही होना चाहिए कौन कौन से इज कंटेस्टेड बिटवीन whom and whom. ठीक है, ये इन सब का सिग्निफिकेंस है in the sense that it tells you about how the relationships will evolve. If you, and again, these are largely in an uninhabited group of islands. There are some inhabitants, but largely uninhabited. Now, again, what is to be understood? It has less to do with what? Please understand, people believe that they are fighting over islands. They are not fighting over islands. This is not more so about resources, more than it is about the control of the seas in the region. Okay. And the larger game of the first island chain, the second island chain, and the response of either sides of tackling these American policies. तो ये broad context है जो आपको first यहाँ पता होना चाहिए. Now coming to what I wanted to discuss with you was on what I had told. This जो मैं आपको बोल रहा था, मलक्का तो आपने सबने सुना है, बट ऑल्सो अबाउट व्हाट? द सुंडा एंड द लॉम्बॉक स्ट्रेट, राइट? ये आपके हैंडआउट में जो द वन हैंडआउट विच यू हैव राइट नाउ, इट हैज दिस मैप्स. Right? If you look, so if you look at these maps, one of the things you'll understand, just one second. ये क्या है? Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands are extremely important because they are close to where? The Malacca Strait. The Chinese are well aware of their vulnerability. Where? Along the Malacca Strait, which they call as the Malacca Dilemma. Their dilemma is that they can't live without the Malacca Strait. Why? Because majority of their trade as well as energy imports come through the Malacca Strait. Almost 60% of the Chinese energy imports come through the Malacca Strait, a strait which is located between Malaysia and Indonesia, and very close to it is what? the Andaman and Nicobar Island, where who stationed? The Indian Navy. And now we have the Tri-Service Command in Andaman and Nicobar. So not just now the Navy, but also the Air Force, as well as predominantly the Navy, but now the Indian Air Force as well as the Army also maintains the presence in the Andaman and Nicobar group of islands. Okay. Now for Chinese, this is a matter of big concern. They call this as their Malacca dilemma also, and also they consider that India can quickly, in case of a larger war conflict between India and China, India can quickly enforce a naval blockade. India can enforce a naval blockade over oil supplies to where? Oil supplies to China or China's exports, thereby threatening China's energy security, its economy. So the Chinese have said we need to find solutions to this Malacca dilemma. Dilemma क्या है कि they can't get rid of what? Their dependence on the Malacca Strait completely. वो तो possible ही नहीं. It's not that Chinese can find an alternative to Malacca which can completely, remove their dependence on Malacca Strait. But the Chinese have been looking to at least decrease their dependence on Malacca. तो इन्होंने बहुत चीजें करी हैं उसके लिए. तो जैसे मैम would have talked to you about CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. क्या है? That from the Gwadar port itself, you get the oil supplies into China, where China's northwest in a Xinjiang region and all that, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It will mean that they will have to import less amount of oil through Malacca. Please, I'm not saying this, that's the only reason they're constructing CPEC. But CPEC helps them in reducing their dependence on Malacca Strait. There are other compelling reasons also for them to do CPEC. But one reason also is Malacca. The second is that they have been looking for finding alternatives to the Malacca Strait through CIMEC also or Myanmar also, but before that through the Sunda Strait, the Lombok Strait, and even exploring the possibility of what they call as the Kra Canal project. तो ये आपको पता होना चाहिए कि Sunda Strait is between which of the island groups of Indonesia. Okay. तो if you look, ये कौन सा island है और ये. Now when you look at these group of islands of Indonesia, okay, the Sunda Strait is one and the other is the Lombok Strait. The idea of the Chinese is this, that the idea of the Chinese is this, that if there is the Malacca Strait that they currently use, where very proximate to the Andaman and Nicobar regions, if they can find an alternative sea route coming through the Indian Ocean region, which takes them through the Sunda Strait or through the Lombok Strait and allows them to enter where? South China Sea and the East China Sea. That will help them reduce their dependence. So and have they used the Sunda Strait or the Lombok Strait previously? They have. However, it is a bit more lengthier, but more importantly, the topography of this region is not completely understood. देखिए क्या होता है, ओशियानिक टोपोग्राफी भी पढ़नी पड़ती है. शिप पता चला कितनी नीचे लग गई और वही डूब गई. ठीक है, तो इसी को कहते हैं ocean hydrographic services which map the sea floor very precisely so that your ships don't collide. So that mapping has not been completed as of yet, but they have used this once in a major way when there was a regime change in Maldives. So China used the Sunda Strait during the regime change in Maldives in 2018, sorry. Okay, so they have used this, but they want to use this further in the future, both the Sunda and the Lombok Strait. As I've written here itself, ये स्ट्रेट किस किस के बीच में है ये आपको पता होना चाहिए, राइट? द सुंडा स्ट्रेट बिटवीन द जावा एंड Sumatra, between the Java and the Sumatra group of islands, and also you see the Lombok Strait, which is largely between Bali and Bali and Lombok, or Bali and Lombok Island is a very small island जिसका नाम लिखने की इतना जरूरत नहीं है, बट आपको एक ब्रॉड पता होना चाहिए आइलैंड्स कहां हैं एंड वेयर आर दीज स्ट्रेट्स. द थर्ड वे दैट दे हैव बीन लुकिंग एट is the possibility of exploring, constructing something like a Panama Canal called as the Kra Canal, through where? Thailand. They said कि भाई can we get our ship through Thailand directly on the South China Sea side. However, this is very difficult to do. Constructing such a canal is extremely expensive and difficult to maintain because silting can happen and many other things can happen. So they have ruled out constructing the Kra Canal. It's going to be very expensive. Okay. However, what they still want to do is, if not construct a canal, जैसे Panama Canal है, okay, connecting the Pacific on one side and the Atlantic on the other, reducing the कोई बात नहीं, पहली बार हो रहा है, कोई बात नहीं, पहली बार सब कुछ होना ही पड़ेगा, तभी दूसरी तीसरी बार कुछ हो पाएगा. पनामा कैनाल आप जाके देखिए, यूएस के लिए बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम था, वेस्ट कोस्ट से ईस्ट कोस्ट कैसे ट्रेड करें. तो दे सेड वी विल बिल्ड अ कैनाल कटिंग थ्रू साउथ अमेरिकन कंट्रीज टू कनेक्ट द पैसिफिक टू द एटलांटिक, रिड्यूसिंग द टाइम फॉर डूइंग ट्रेड. थोड़ा सा जाके गूगल करना ना, पनामा कैनाल क्या था, क्यों बनाया. A similar project they wanted to do here, but this is more expensive and they said that this is going to be unfeasible economically to do it. So what they have done is, and they proposed to the Thai government, is that if we can't construct a canal, we can definitely construct a railways. So what can be done is that the Chinese ships, for example, can bring the goods up to the west coast of Thailand here, and at the narrowest point they can construct a rail network, offload the ships onto the rails, and again offload them on the eastern side, and from there through ships. Okay, so the Kra Canal project is also one project which is time and again talked about in the context of Thailand. Okay, and that is why all of this is there. Next, ये जब context आपको clear हो गया, तो there is the third aspect also जो आपने म्यांमार में context में पढ़ा होगा, partly to reduce the dependence on the Malacca Strait is the sea, क्या? The CMEC corridor, the China-Myanmar economic corridor, right? That the China-Myanmar economic corridor, which is often talked about, is where, if you look, it should be, yes, right? The CMEC corridor is here. Now, ये आपने पढ़ा है? नहीं पढ़ा है तो कोई बात नहीं, इसमें कुछ नहीं है. The Kapku port, the Chinese are looking at have developed the Kapku port already. It's a deep sea water port, Kapku. ये सीधा सीधा पता होना चाहिए, बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट पोर्ट है for the Chinese. Where? In Myanmar. Page number whatever. नहीं है, 12. Page number 12. Page number 12. Much like the China Pakistan economic corridor, they also want to build oil and pipelines connecting through the Kapku port to Kunming. Kunming is the capital of the Yunnan province of China. Yunnan province of China, which is one of the underdeveloped regions of China. It is economically an underdeveloped region of China, and to ensure oil supplies into Yunnan, they have sought to rely on Myanmar. Myanmar will get transit fee for these pipelines, and it will, if the Chinese can get uninterrupted oil supplies through the pipelines that built through Myanmar into China, it will benefit Myanmar as it will get transit fee and economic gain. It will benefit the Chinese as it will reduce the dependence on the Malacca Strait और Malacca dilemma. तो ये एक चीज और है, ठीक है. And also, needless to say, the Chinese are also doing what? They've signed a couple of years ago, in 3 or 4 years ago, the Chinese signed a 30-year contract of buying oil from whom? The Russians. The $100 billion deal they signed for 30 years to buy oil from the Russians. It will also reduce the dependence on Malacca. But however amount of dependence it may reduce on Malacca, it will never eliminate the Malacca dilemma. Why? Because the Malacca Strait is used not just for oil, but also for trade. And both for oil, but also for trade as well. And even on oil, there will never arrive a time that they say, okay, we will not get oil through Malacca, or we can reduce dependence on Malacca to zero as far as our oil supplies are concerned. That day will never arrive. And that is why we say geography is partly destiny in international relations. ठीक है, वो हो ही नहीं सकता. ठीक है. Vajpayee said, we cannot choose our neighbors. Geography. So it is that context which is there. Now, if this is clear to you, next aspect here that I wanted to kind of throw light on. So this is what I've thrown light to you on, is the South China Sea, East China Sea, and also ASEAN. ठीक है. लेकिन ASEAN के बारे में one thing that I have not talked about is giving you some sense of the today China-ASEAN relationship. Okay, just to give you a broad context firstly, who's ASEAN's number one of biggest trading partners? China. Today, China is one of the biggest trading partners of ASEAN countries. Okay, in fact, you will find that China is not just one of the biggest trading partners of ASEAN countries, it shares the land border with many of the ASEAN countries. So all of that is there, and is land border, and apart from trade, China also shares transboundary rivers with a number of ASEAN countries. Okay, and it is in this context, why is this river business so important? Because water already is, but even so in the future will become, and this is also a map that I personally like. देखिए, maps tell you a lot depending on which map you're looking. Some people are like, देखिए इस मैप में कोई बॉर्डर नहीं है, पहली बार ऐसा कुछ खास है ना, क्योंकि मैप रिवर्स का मैप है. ठीक है. So basically, if you look at this particular map, it tells you one thing. A lot of freshwater rivers which supply water for drinking, for irrigation, for a lot of other purposes arise where? In China, more particularly in Tibet. Okay, or that is why Tibet is considered the water plateau of the world. Okay, especially in the context of Asia, or particularly in case of South Asia and Southeast Asia. ये बड़ा ignored the point है, but UPSC likes to ask also, and you should know also. छोड़िए बाकी, ये देखिए जो भी अपना इंडस का भी पार्टली ओरिजिन वहीं से है ही है, Baki, the Kailash Mansarovar, and partly the origins of Ganga, etc. also is from there. The Yarlung Zangpo, which is the Brahmaputra. Then, apart from this, the Irrawaddy, the Salween, the Mekong, and there are others also. There are 2 or 3 more, but the Irrawaddy, the Salween, as well as the Mekong are 3 other major rivers which originate from the Tibetan plateau and go into major Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so Irrawaddy is one of the major rivers of Myanmar. So is partly Salween, and definitely Mekong is one of the longest rivers of Southeast Asia, which touches upon where Mekong passes from China. It partly touches along the border of Myanmar and Laos. It partly goes into Thailand also, then travels through Laos into Cambodia and also into Vietnam. Okay, so that is why the Mekong River is considered one of the major lifelines of Southeast Asia, supplying fresh water for irrigation, for drinking purposes, etc. Just like the Ganga is the lifeline for North India, right? So that is why it is also considered an important set of rivers in this region. The Irrawaddy, the Salween, and the Mekong. हैं तो और भी, there's the Yangtze and Yellow River, etc., which are predominantly where in China. Yangtze and the Yellow. तो जब आप चाइना पढ़ेंगे तो एक बार बार बात होती है, वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट, देखिए एकदम सिंपल सा पॉइंट है, मोस्ट ऑफ चाइनीज पॉपुलेशन लिव्स हियर, मोस्ट ऑफ द वाटर इज हियर, एंड उसमें भी ज्यादा वाटर इज वेयर, मोस्ट ऑफ द वाटर विच इज ओरिजिनेटिंग इन चाइना is going, the Chinese are like, we'll build dams here on all these. So the Chinese have been looking to build dams here, and then transport the water here. Do you think that's possible? No, that's not possible. Huh? India's interlinking of rivers is possible. जिनसे रोड नहीं बनती वो कर लेंगे और ये नहीं कर पाएंगे, इनसे तो बनता ही नहीं है कुछ. They are known all their life. The Chinese are known for executing mega infrastructure projects. That is their USP. India exports software to the world. Chinese export infrastructure to the world. They are known for building mega infrastructure projects. If in the world there is one power capable of doing this, it is China. And that is why everybody is concerned in Southeast Asia to India. The Chinese have stated this explicitly as a part of their 30-year plan of interlinking the southern rivers with the eastern rivers. The Chinese are already building dams along the Great Bend in where the Chinese have started the process of building one of the biggest dams in the world along the Great Bend in Brahmaputra, and they want to go ahead with it. Whether it happens or not, we don't know. They have already done so in the case of where? Mekong. Mekong में तो उन्होंने series of dams they have already constructed, so much so that they control the flow of water in the Mekong River already. As of now, the Chinese do not deprive the lower riparian states of the Mekong water. However, in case the relationship goes south, the Chinese can play an important role in what? Controlling the flow of water in the southern, in the lower riparian states, which doesn't mean necessarily what? Holding off all the water, because it may not simply be possible to do so. Please understand, dam बनाया इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि सारा पानी नहीं जाने देंगे, ये तो possible ही नहीं है. Again, I said geography, है ना? Because the dam will break, flooding will happen in your own territory, whatever. But dams can be regulated to regulate the flow of water in the lower riparian states. You may release excess water during monsoon season and flood the lower country, or you may hold off water during summer season. Yeah, summer season or in the pre-monsoon season, in the sowing season, and control the flow of water in the lower country. The lower riparian states of China, in this case, which share the Mekong River, are states like a Cambodia or a state like Laos, etc., which are economically nowhere close to China and also are lower riparians, while the Chinese have gone ahead and built dams on the Mekong River. The way the China has treated the lower riparians of Mekong is a matter of concern for whom? ASEAN countries, but also is a matter of concern for whom? India. Because if they can do that, they can do, at least attempt to do something similarly on the Indian case. However, this may not be an exactly good comparison because India is a way more powerful state as compared to many of these Southeast Asian countries. लेकिन मेकोंग गंगा कोऑपरेशन क्या है ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. It's a regional cooperation organization which was formed. What is the Mekong River? There is also called something called the Mekong-Lekong cooperation. ये यहाँ नहीं मिलेगा आपको. The Chinese never sign a water sharing treaty with anybody, and they have never done so with any of the other countries except in the case of Mekong River. The Chinese went ahead and built the dams. Then the lower country said, hi. So the Chinese said, don't you worry, we will sign a water sharing agreement with you. However, the terms of the agreement are decided by whom? China. And they first built the dams and then signed the agreement, not the other way around. India signed the Indus Water Treaty. पहले ट्रीटी साइन किया, फिर डैम बनाया. वो पहले डैम वैम बना लिया, अब आप कर लेते हैं साइन ट्रीटी. ठीक. So what is to be understood is that why the Tibetan Plateau is so important. It is considered the water capital of the world. China's infrastructure capabilities, the track record of building mega infrastructure projects, their track record of being the upper riparian state, which has often gone ahead and unilaterally constructed dams, is often a matter of concern for ASEAN countries. So is for India. ठीक है. तो ये एक बहुत ब्रॉड चीज है जो आपको पहले पता होना चाहिए. अब देखिए मैं, because even when ma'am is going to later come and speak to you about many of these things, so you should know कि क्या चल क्या रहा है, कहाँ है मेकोंग रिवर, क्यों उसका इंपॉर्टेंस है, how does the Mekong River and the way the Chinese have reacted to the Mekong River is a matter of concern for Indians. This broad so India's concern is not so with Mekong. India's concern is that if they have done so with Mekong, they may try to do the same with Brahmaputra. That's the point. देखिए अभी जो मैं ये और बता दूं, जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूं ये थोड़ा सा अभी इट्स एट अ वेरी जनरल लेवल है ना. एंड डोंट ड्रॉ सम मेगा कंक्लूजन्स कि अच्छा अब तो चाइना बना ही देगा और ब्रह्मपुत्र पे और फिर अब हमारे पास तो पानी रह ही जाएगा. द पाकिस्तानी politicians say India is storing water of the, India is building dams on the Indus, and by building dams on the Indus it is taking out electricity from the water. Then what is left in the water? Chinese, the Pakistani politicians have said this. They on record have said this to their population. Okay, that the Pakistani side is facing water scarcity because India is misusing the water of the Indus, is building dams on the even the west flowing rivers and is taking out electricity from the water, and that water is of no use. And then we Indians obviously have enough reasons to laugh for it because we can laugh at other people's stupidity. But then there were some Indians who were like, nano chip यही है, इसी नोट के अंदर है. Difficult to laugh at ourselves, right? वो दूसरे का समझ में आता है stupidity, अपना नहीं. Now चलिए, तो this is something आपने so the Mekong is one thing that I wanted to draw your attention to. Now देखिए मैं ये नहीं पढ़ाना चाह रहा हूं क्योंकि आई एम अज्यूमिंग आपने पढ़ लिया है, नहीं पढ़ा है तो जाके पढ़ लीजिए। क्या इंडिया म्यांमार, या एनीबॉडी हैड अ क्वेश्चन, समबडी वाज आस्किंग समथिंग? ठीक है, ये बड़ा बेसिक चीज है, पूछा जाता है। म्यांमार शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर विथ विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग स्टेट्स ऑफ इंडिया नॉर्थ ईस्ट? सीधा सीधा क्वेश्चन है, इसमें कुछ नहीं पढ़ाना है, आपको पता होना चाहिए। या इट डजंट शेयर अ बॉर्डर विथ विच ऑफ द स्टेट्स? इफ यू लुक, अरुणाचल प्रदेश इट शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर विथ, राइट? अरुणाचल प्रदेश के नीचे क्या है ये? नागालैंड, इट शेयर्स अ बॉर्डर विथ Manipur, it shares the border with, and Mizoram, it shares a border with. Now, similarly, you should know which of the states do share a border with Bangladesh. ये भी आपको पता होना चाहिए। या मेरा सिंपलर तरीका है याद रखने का, which do not share a border with। और हमेशा याद रखिए अरुणाचल, नागालैंड, मणिपुर एंड मिजोरम, ये सारे आर द वंस विच शेयर डायरेक्ट बॉर्डर विथ म्यांमार। बाकी इधर मेघालय एंड ऑल दोस थिंग्स दे डोंट डू। तो ये क्या है? त्रिपुरा। तो अब यू नो कि भाई बांग्लादेश के साथ हु शेयर्स द बॉर्डर? वेस्ट बंगाल। Does Sikkim? Sikkim doesn't share, है ना? This is Sikkim, right? Then you have Assam, you have Meghalaya, you have Tripura, you have Mizoram. ठीक है, तो हमेशा याद रखिए, बड़ा बेसिक है, पूछा गया है पहले भी। तो this is there. Now, Myanmar, anyways, you would have studied broadly अभी के लिए। तो now the next thing. Any questions that you have till here? Anything that you want to ask? No. पहले ही लेक्चर में हो गया कि सर अब so let me now go back to the story of what? ये जो about Southeast Asia. One another thing about Southeast Asia is Southeast Asia is very important for India, particularly आपने म्यांमार का सुना है, but why? Partly also because Myanmar sits along where? The Golden Triangle. This Golden Triangle, देखिए ये Golden Triangle क्या है? See, we are the original narcos of the world. बाकी सब फेल है दुनिया के आगे। The world's biggest production of opium happens along the west as well as along the east of India. In the west, which is in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan, Pakistan and Iran region, more so in Afghanistan. Why are we interested in opium production? Because opium is something what people get addicted to. That is why. No, वो ठीक है. It has public health concerns and all of that. But opium trade generates a lot of wealth. And this wealth is often used for doing what? This wealth is often used for fueling militant organizations and supporting prolonged insurgencies, militancies or terrorism. है ना? तो terrorism is one word commonly used, misused, abused. America's war on terror. By God, there is a lot of terror in America's war on terror. कब से चल रहा है? जहां लगता है अमेरिका को कि अभी लड़ना है तो वहां पे क्या होता है? वॉर ऑन टेरर. देयर इज नो यूएन रिकॉग्नाइज्ड डेफिनेशन ऑन टेररिज्म. कोई है ही नहीं. somebody said, तो मैं नहीं जाऊंगा वैसे सब में, लेकिन ठीक है. बट इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट इज armed insurgencies have been fueled to a large extent by money coming from selling opium. Once upon a time, Taliban was T for Taliban, T for terrorism. Now they formed the government in Afghanistan and everybody is sending goods also, diplomats also, doing trade also, and Americans have forgotten that this was their war on terror. Terrorism has short lifespan. So basically, but Taliban's what prolonged armed conflicts were financed by the opium produced from the eastern portions of Taliban, which was sold throughout the world, one of the highest, finest qualities of opium. Similarly, on the eastern border of India, in Myanmar region and the Yunnan province of China, and this extended portion of Thailand and Laos, there is also a lot of opium production which happens here. Now this opium is sold, and from this opium comes the money which fuels insurgencies in Myanmar. Okay, there are many insurgencies which go on in Myanmar, and I'm not talking here of the Rohingya conflict. The Rohingya is not really a very big militant conflict. There is the Kachin State Revolutionary Group. There are many insurgencies in Myanmar which are fueled by what? The opium trade. Partly in case of India, in the case of Nagaland, you have in Nagaland also insurgency, etc., which is fueled by this opium trade. So arms trafficking, all of that happens, and insurgencies because of this opium trade. So this becomes an important point of consideration for India's what? Closer cooperation also with partly Southeast Asian countries, more so Myanmar, because if we do help, or if countries do cooperate with each other in tackling the opium trade in the Golden Triangle region, it will help in tackling what? Insurgencies in the region as well. Okay, that's there. Now, तो ये गोल्डन ट्रायंगल गोल्डन क्रिसेंट पे प्रीलिम्स में पहले क्वेश्चन पूछा गया है, जो मैंने लिख के आपको दिया है उस पे, या मैं आपको पढ़ा रहा हूँ, ये सब पे पूछा गया, या तो हवा में कुछ नहीं आया कि ये बस मजे के लिए हो रहा है ना, ये सब पूछा गया है. They've asked you which of the countries are members of constitute the golden triangle, which countries constitute the golden crescent. Question was asked in the mains examination that with respect to the golden triangle and golden crescent, discuss the major security challenges or implications for India. Only it is not just that Punjab becomes Udta Punjab because of the golden crescent, but apart from the humanitarian crisis, there is also the possibility of prolonged armed insurgencies being funded in the region, terror activities being funded in the region, and because of these narco trafficking. दुनिया में कई लोग बोलते हैं कि I find this very amusing about the Taliban. Taliban is like no to alcohol, and they're like giving the world opium. Now, if one is to make a conscious choice between opium and alcohol, it would be a tough battle to decide which nasha to choose. And तो लोग बोलते हैं कि many different religions have different yes or no's about different intoxicants. Okay, you're supplying the best intoxicant to the world. The British supplied the opium where? China, during the 1830s and 40s and 50s, which led to the opium wars. Who was selling the opium in? But were the British East India Company selling opium in China? Yes. Produced from where? India. Not just the British East India Company was selling opium in China. Who was selling opium in China? Indian traders were selling opium in China. Who Indian traders? The one who built your modern Mumbai or Bombay. The Jamshedji Jejaboy JJ Group, which is built large of South Bombay, to many other, not just the Parsi traders, but Gujarati traders and other traders also have done a lot of opium trade to China. बोला कहाँ आप नार्कोस वार्कोस देख रहे हैं, अपना एकदम सीन नेक्स्ट लेवल सेट है. ठीक. So this is why security implications are intricately related to opium trade, apart from the humanitarian costs associated with many of these trading activities. Now, and that is why ये golden triangle and crescent is also important. BIMSTEC पे अभी मोदी जी की कोई मीट होने वाली है, सपोज टू गो टू आई थिंक अ बिम्स्टेक मीटिंग, एंड इसका हैज शुभ्रा मैम टॉक टू यू अबाउट बिम्स्टेक ऑलरेडी? नो, राइट? हैज शी टॉक टू यू अबाउट सार्क? नो, नॉट मच. देखिए ये कहानी हम बार बार पढ़ेंगे. क्या? सार्क. सार्क का आइडिया किसने दिया था? Who conceptualized, who gave the idea of SARC? 1983, Bangladesh. Bangladesh gave the idea of SARC. देखिए क्यों आया था सार्क का आइडिया? The South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. सुनने में बड़ा अच्छा लग रहा है, ऐसा कुछ है नहीं. ठीक है. SARC as an idea was given by Bangladesh. When? In 1982-83. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. This idea was given. India was not very keen on the idea of SARC. Why? Because when Bangladesh gave the idea, Bangladesh idea was कि does geography favor India in South Asia? In context of India's relations with South Asian neighbors, does geography favor India? You will see it immensely favors India. ठीक है? Immensely favors India where as far as South Asia is concerned. How so? Sri Lanka. Okay. Bangladesh, जैसा आपको पता ही है, surrounded by India from three sides. When you look at Bhutan and Nepal, you will find that north of Bhutan and Nepal are Himalayas. Himalayas which are 8,000 मीटर्स हाई. उनको क्रॉस करके उधर जाना बहुत मुश्किल काम है. एज मच एज द चाइनीज मे ट्राई, इट इज गोइंग टू बी एक्सट्रीमली एक्सपेंसिव टू डू एंड दस फाइनेंशियली अनवायबल. मोर सो मूविंग ट्रूप्स अक्रॉस द हिमालयाज इज अ हिमालयन एक्सरसाइज. इतना आसान नहीं है. ठीक है. सो फॉर ट्रूप्स टू कम फ्रॉम नॉर्थ टू द साउथ ऑफ हिमालयाज is extremely difficult to do, is practically impossible to do even today. किसी ने आर्टिकल लिखा था, मैंने नहीं लिखा था, किसी आर्मी वाले आदमी ने आर्टिकल लिखा था in the Indian Express that the Indians and Chinese are not fighting each other as much as in Ladakh as they are fighting geography. That staying at those altitudes, mobilizing those kind of troops, even Ladakh has some of those areas are plains, is extremely difficult. It's just practically impossible. More so in the case of the Himalayas. Geography says that Nepal and Bhutan have to look towards India for access to sea. They are landlocked countries. Landlocked countries का तो वैसे ही कुछ नहीं है दुनिया में. There are very few landlocked countries in the world. आपने देखा होगा, आप कहीं भी मैप उठा के देखिए, पूरा अफ्रीका का मैप उठा दीजिए, 54 कंट्री है उसमें, कितनी लैंडलॉक्ड हैं? बहुत कम. कईयों की आप बाउंड्री देखेंगे, अरे ऐसे बीच सेंट्रल अफ्रीका में है, ओ इतनी सी कॉरिडोर है फॉर एक्सेस टू सी. देयर आर वेरी फ्यू कंट्रीज इन द वर्ल्ड व्हिच डोंट हैव एक्सेस टू सी. ऑफ द फ्यू कंट्रीज which in the world do not have access to sea, most of them are extremely dependent on their neighbors for access to sea, and also their neighbors have an overwhelming influence on landlocked states. Case in point, Nepal and Bhutan. India has tremendous influence over the activities of both Nepal and Bhutan. Part of the reason is A, they are located south of Himalayas. तो हिमालय क्रॉस करके चाइना से ट्रेड करना बहुत मुश्किल काम है उनके लिए. Secondly, for access to sea, they are dependent on India. Okay, so the north, the Himalayan divide forces them to look towards India. So also their dependence on India for access to sea for doing trade makes them look towards India. एक कंट्री और अगर जिसका आपको एग्जांपल लैंडलॉक देखना, अफगानिस्तान. अफगानिस्तान डज नॉट हैव एक्सेस टू सी, सो इट इज डिपेंडेंट ऑन होम? पाकिस्तान एंड ईरान फॉर एक्सेस टू सी. पाकिस्तान हैज ऑलवेज यूज्ड अफगानिस्तान's dependence to increase its own influence on Afghanistan. right? And for other purposes as well. So you'll see that geography and landlocked countries often are dependent on the neighboring states. So Bangladesh and Nepal का आपको समझ में आ गया. Sri Lanka, भाई, if you go back in history, as I often say, Cholas, the Chola Empire conquered Sri Lanka, established the rule over Sri Lanka and ruled over Sri Lanka almost for a good 100 years in 900 to 1000 AD. 1000 साल पहले की बात है. Sri Lankans are well aware that the Tamil state and their proximity to whom? India. India can quickly annex Sri Lanka. There is no other country for thousands of kilometers away. You're like, sir, China आएगा. वो बहुत दूर है. Geography wise, Sri Lanka is very close to India. Shiv Shankar Menon said it can work the other way around also. Third parties can look at Sri Lanka, establish a military presence there and pose a security threat to India. वो भी है. But primarily there is no immediate third party in the context of Sri Lanka. Bangladesh is there, Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan. पाकिस्तान की वल्नरेबिलिटी के बारे में बात होती नहीं है, बट पाकिस्तान इज एक्सट्रीमली वल्नरेबल टू इंडिया. आई एम नॉट सेइंग गुड थिंग्स अबाउट पाकिस्तान. मैं पाकिस्तान का शत्रु हूं. मैं कसम खाता हूं, आई डोंट सपोर्ट पाकिस्तान. पहली क्लास में बता देता. स्टैट्यूटरी वार्निंग इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ व्हाटएवर इज हैपनिंग ऑन सोशल मीडिया. जहां लिखना है लिखवा दो, मैं बोर्ड पकड़ के खड़ा हो जाता हूं. हैविंग सेड दैट, Pakistan is an intensely vulnerable country as far as India is concerned. Why so? The Pakistani capital of Islamabad is not even 150 kilometers from Indian border. Okay? एक रात में हो जाएगा. कोई कुछ नहीं है. There is no mountain. There is no major river. It is a plain stretch of land. चलो, इससे ज्यादा नहीं लगना है. Pakistan's vulnerability as far as its important centers are concerned. The other is Lahore. Lahore is 60-70 kilometers from अमृतसर. जितना आपको यहां से दिल्ली, एनसीआर, फरीदाबाद और थोड़ा और चले जाओ मेरठ वेरठ तक, इतने में हो जाएगा. कराची हो जाएगा. And Pakistan is well aware of its geographical vulnerability as compared to India. That is why they always wanted to have the nuclear button. Okay. So their point is very simple. You acquire Lahore, we will bomb Lahore. It is as simple as this. पाकिस्तान देखिए, अगर आप जाके देखेंगे इंडिया न्यूक्लियर डॉक्ट्राइन में, तो एक बात लिखी हुई है that if Indian troops are attacked by nuclear weapons, whether within Indian territory or outside Indian territory, then we will respond with a nuclear attack. ठीक है? As a part of India's no first use policy. The question is there a possibility of Indian troops being attacked with nuclear weapons outside Indian territory? The answer is yes. If Indian troops enter into Pakistan, there is a very legitimate reason and possibility of Pakistan using what they call as low yield nuclear weapons, called as tactical nuclear weapons, to drop a weapon on their own territory to bomb out Indian forces. तो वो एक अलग, जैसे बहुत टेक्निकल चीजें हमारे लिए जरूरत नहीं है. But the point is essentially is this: Pakistan partly sees the nuclear weapon as their ultimate security option to address the geographical vulnerability vis-a-vis India. Apart from the fact that the Indian military is 10 times, Indian economy is more than 10 times bigger than the Pakistani economy. Militarily, we are way more powerful, but geographically also they are vulnerable as compared to, as regards their relations with India. तो मैंने आपको भी ब्रॉड एक चीज समझाई. Geographically, India's neighbors are largely vulnerable to India because firstly, almost all of India's neighbors who are also members of SAARC share a land border with India, but they do not share a land border with each other. आपस में तो नहीं है, except for Pakistan's border with Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the only country which doesn't share the land border with India. right? And shares the land border with Pakistan, right? So that's there. Now it is in this context, once you note all these points, coming back, ये सब क्यों सुनाई आपको कहानी? I said SARC as an idea was given by Bangladesh. Bangladesh said alone we can never tackle India. Alone, none of the other neighbors of India can also tackle India. But if all the neighbors of India unite together to make joint demands to India, they have a chance of dealing with India. And so came the idea of SARC. Matlab, if a Bangladesh, a Pakistan, a Sri Lanka, a Bhutan, a Nepal, all of them can present joint demands to India on a regional forum, there is a better chance that India will listen to it rather than dealing with India alone. आप हमेशा देखेंगे in IR, India says we prefer to have bilateral talks, and small countries are like, let's use the regional forum. Why? Smaller countries are interested in using regional forums because they feel they can have like-minded partners, okay, who have similar concerns, okay, and then you can use a regional forum to voice those concerns against a bigger party. Okay. So came the idea of SARC. Indira Gandhi is like, this doesn't sound like a very good idea. We like doing bilateral relationship. And Indira Gandhi died 84 and everything. Rajiv Gandhi came. Rajiv Gandhi is like, okay, we can give it a try. Why? Because if India would refuse to be a member of SARC, then India's neighbors would say, see, India doesn't want to have a regional forum where we can discuss our issues. India is being the big brother. India is being the bully. India doesn't want to listen to its neighbors. करते तो बात पंचशील की है और इक्वालिटी की बात करते हैं, but India doesn't treat its neighbors as equals. Okay. So India said, कर लो यार SARC. Let's talk in SARC. And so came the idea of SARC. But India said, we have also our conditions if we have to participate in SARC. Firstly, no outstanding bilateral disputes will be discussed in SARC. मतलब इंडस वाटर को नहीं लेके आओगे तुम SARC. Border issues will not come in SARC. ठीक, economy and all, I'm not getting into it right now, but we had our own concerns and we also voiced strongly that these things will not be discussed in SARC. Over time, SARC had a rule. What rule? All decisions that SARC makes for regional cooperation will be done through consensus. All bodies, all members of SARC countries will agree to it. Only then a decision will be taken and implemented. Pakistan and India never could agree to anything. And so SARC could never come to an agreement on any major issue of trade or connectivity. आपको लगता है सर क्या ट्रेड और क्या कनेक्टिविटी? If you go back to whom? Akhand Bharat, which was built by British India. British India was the Akhand Bharat that we are looking to. The British had railways everywhere. The British had railways running into Myanmar, into Bangladesh. देखिए ऐसा जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूं ये ऐसा नहीं है कि पॉसिबल नहीं है, ये था, तो ये वापस हो सकता है. ठीक है, तो ऐसा भी नहीं है कि इट्स लाइक Elon Musk saying that we'll go to Mars. Some people may say, sir, going to Mars is possible. Building a rail line with Pakistan is not. तो बातें बहुत हुई थी सार्क में. देखिए बातें करने में साउथ एशियंस आर चैंपियंस. वी आर सिविलाइजेशनली द सेम पीपल ना. Civilizationally, we are the same people. We eat the same food, enjoy the same music, and are often very similar. We don't like standing in queue, like watching patriarchal shows and relishing in them. वो सब civilizationally very similar people. Now, during the British era, there was railways connecting India to Bangladesh and to Myanmar. Pakistan था ही नहीं, so obviously there was all rail connectivity, etc. All the way, even land route connectivity up till Afghanistan. India frankly lost a lot, geopolitically speaking, because of the partition. And that was, for example, if only India would have had technically no partition in the West, hypothetically speaking, India would have a tremendous influence in Afghanistan and Central Asia. The Indian foreign policy would look very different. Okay, but that obviously India has a limitation of geography as far as the West is concerned, but everywhere else geography favors India. Now, so basically, so there used to be colonial era railways which constructed many of these areas, and it is quite much possible to revive those railway lines very easily. And in fact, even in the 1990s, 80s, etc., many attempts were made to revive the rail lines for goods and trade, etc. Okay, और एक बात भी अभी भी चलती है, बार बार होती रहती है. Afghanistan and Pakistan have a trade agreement. India and Afghanistan have a trade agreement. So the Afghans say, you allow us to do trade with India. Indians also say, allow us to do trade with Afghanistan. So whether it is the movement of goods through railways or roads or movement of people, everything is possible. In today's time, for example, already also the movement of goods and people ke alawa, there is something which is also possible. What is that? Electricity. There is already the electricity grid. Indian electricity grid is connected to Nepal. It is connected to Bhutan. It is connected to Bangladesh. ये तो पहले से ही connected है. हम बेच रहे इनको electricity. We buy electricity from Bhutan. We sell it to Bangladesh. We sell it to Nepal. Now many have forgotten. When Mr. Modi came to power in 2014, and we invited all the prime ministers to the swearing in ceremony and all that. At that time, initially, our idea was floated of even interlinking India's electricity grid to where? Pakistan, by none other than the Adanis. So the Adani project was to link it in the Sindh region to Pakistan and sell some 1,000 megawatts of electricity to Pakistan. But since then, many things happened and it didn't materialize. But there's a very realistic possibility of having connected what is called as SAARC electricity grid. Matlab, Indians can sell electricity to Pakistan, or what? Bhutan, which produces a large amount of electricity, can sell electricity through India to where? Bangladesh. Why is it that if you start promoting such kind of a trade, it will benefit the economies, definitely, but it will benefit what is a very commonly used word called as regional cooperation. Why is regional cooperation an important thing? Because it benefits people, lives, etc. वो सब ठीक है, trade ठीक है sir. The very common saying in international relations, if goods don't cross borders, guns will. लड़ाई होगी अगर ट्रेड नहीं हो रहा है. Is Russian and American economy very closely interlinked? No. The German and Russian is, Germans don't want to fight Russians. Russians don't want to fight Germans. But America is like, nahi, lado. Right? So SAARC as an idea, if could promote regional economic cooperation, then it would benefit even peace in the region. Now, and this is one thing that Indian policymakers have understood for a long time and have thus been keen on the idea of regional economic cooperation under SAARC since India went for liberalization. Once we started doing trade with other countries on a large scale after 1991, we wanted to do regional economic cooperation with all countries in South Asia. Who did not want to do with India? Nobody. And at the top of it, not Pakistan. Pakistan was at the top कि हमको तो कुछ नहीं करना है इंडिया के साथ. Okay. Neither do we want roads, nor railways, nor electricity. कुछ भूखे मर जाएंगे लेकिन इंडिया से नहीं लेंगे. We will not do trade with Indians. India gave WTO MFN status to Pakistan in 92-93. Most favored nation status, जो सबको देना होता है, जो आप इकोनॉमी में पढ़ ही रहे होंगे या आगे पढ़ेंगे. ठीक है. That we will follow similar standards of tariff and regulation with all countries, that will, and the same will follow with Pakistan. Pakistan did not give MFN status to India. Okay. And so on and so forth. And Pakistan said, we don't want to do trade with Indians. We don't want electricity, nothing. कुछ नहीं चाहिए हमको तुम्हारा. ठीक है. तो Indian said, okay. Then SAARC cannot be used as a medium for regional cooperation. Because who will keep blocking all Indian initiatives for promoting regional cooperation? Pakistan. So can we have a regional grouping which is without Pakistan? That is BIMSTEC. India said, SAARC, if it's not going to be viable because Pakistan roadblocks all the initiatives in SAARC, we are keen in having regional cooperation. 1997 BIMSTEC idea was formulated. And India said, even if Pakistan is blocking such initiatives, we should move towards regional cooperation with like-minded partners, even if that means turning east. And so came the idea of BIMSTEC. The Bay of Bengal, countries which share Bay of Bengal are located along the Bay of Bengal, they will form a regional grouping. And India, so India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Bangladesh. ठीक, इसमें कौन नहीं है? और अफगानिस्तान. हम मॉलडीव छुटपुट को साइड रखते. क्या? Pakistan and Afghanistan are not there in BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC, however, is regional cooperation looking eastwards. One of the reasons why India proposed the idea of BIMSTEC is now clear to you, because SAARC was becoming increasingly dysfunctional. But there's another reason. इसमें और कौन है? Myanmar and Thailand, who are which countries? Southeast Asian countries. So India said BIMSTEC is bringing together all these countries in the Bay of Bengal region, which includes some of the important ASEAN countries as well. So BIMSTEC is also going to help India's Look East policy. It merges with India's Look East policy also. It merges with the overall Indian objective of regional cooperation as well. And BIMSTEC can thus help in hitting two birds with one stone. Ek bird is what? One bird is the bird of cooperation with ASEAN countries. The other bird is the bird of regional cooperation. Please don't write an answer. India conceptualized the idea of BIMSTEC because it wanted to kill two birds with one stone. ऐसे नहीं लिखना है. लेकिन this is the larger objective. ये question mains में पूछा गया था. That in the light of conceptualization of BIMSTEC as a regional grouping, discuss the significance of BIMSTEC and ऑल्सो इसी के अंडर जब हम लेटर पढ़ेंगे BBIN और बहुत सारी चीजों की बात हुई है. बांग्लादेश, भूटान, इंडिया, नेपाल कॉरिडोर है ना. अभी आपने न्यूज़पेपर में पढ़ा होगा मोटर व्हीकल एग्रीमेंट, सब यही है, इसी के अंडर है, बट कहानी ये है. ठीक है. तो आपको क्या पता होना चाहिए? बिम्स्टेक बैंकॉक डिक्लेरेशन 97 में दिया गया था. बिम्स्टेक सेक्रेटेरिएट कहाँ है? ढाका में है. और बिम्स्टेक के कौन कौन मेंबर्स हैं? Is this much clear? So we'll stop here for today. I'll give you the other handout tomorrow also. कल एक दो और हैंडआउट्स आपको मिल जाएंगे. हाँ जी, हाँ. बैंकॉक में एक डिक्लेरेशन साइन हुआ था आफ्टर 97 कि वी विल बिल्ड सच अ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. शुड वी ट्राई टू रिवाइव सार्क? सार्क के बारे में बाद में बात करेंगे. आई वॉज जस्ट गिविंग यू द कॉन्टेक्स्ट कि बिम्स्टेक बना क्यों था. द ओनली रीजन आई वांटेड टू एक्सप्लेन यू राइट नाउ इज व्हाई वाज बिम्स्टेक फॉर्म्ड. क्योंकि आप ये पूछ सकते हैं कि सर बनाया क्यों ही है, सार्क से ही नहीं काम चल सकता था, नहीं चल रहा था इसलिए बिम्स्टेक बनाया. ऑर्गेनाइजेशन तो बहुत चलती रहती है, इप्सा ब्रिक्स सब चल रहा है, मीटिंग चलती रहती है, बट द व्हाई वी प्राइमरीली कंसेप्चुअलाइज द आइडिया. So we'll stop here for today. Tomorrow I'll take the class. So what I'll do is, देखिए अभी मैंने आपको ब्रॉड आइडिया साउथ ईस्ट एशिया एंड ईस्ट एशिया का दे दिया है. कल विल ब्रीफली टेक द आइडिया ऑफ वेस्ट एशिया एंड इफ पॉसिबल सम आइडिया ऑफ सेंट्रल एशिया, और एंड देन आई विल स्टार्ट विद दिस साउथ एशिया पे वापस आके. क्या ये जो अ ब्रीफ डिस्कशन ऑन श्रीलंका आपका हो गया है, तो अ ब्रीफ डिस्कशन ऑन चाइना फैक्टर एंड श्रीलंका उस पर मैं लिखवाऊंगा भी. आई डिक्टेट एंड आई गिव यू नोट्स, यू आई राइट, यू राइट विथ मी. सिमिलरली ऑन इंडिया, म्यांमार, भूटान में आप लोगों का म्यांमार हुआ है, श्रीलंका हुआ है, बांग्लादेश. इन तीनों को जल्दी से करके देन विल गो टू भूटान एंड नेपाल. भूटान नेपाल बेचारों के साथ अच्छा नहीं है कुछ. दे आर स्टक बिटवीन, एज दे कॉल व्हाट, दे आर एग स्टक बिटवीन टू रॉक्स. वन रॉक इज इंडिया. ऑमलेट. विल स्टॉप इट. थैंक यू.